Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video.
Bulma looked over at her husband out of the corner of her eye. Vegeta was sitting at the kitchen table in the spot he had claimed as his over 20 years ago, his usual morning cup of coffee in front of him. His hand was gripping the mug handle, but the coffee was untouched. The prince was visibly struggling to keep his bloodshot eyes open and not nod off right where he was sitting. Bulma shook her head at his stubbornness and looked back down at the cup of hot chocolate she was preparing herself. "Just say the word," she finally said, seeing Vegeta flinch at the sound of her voice. "I can go pick up some sleeping medication for you in an hour." "Chen, such things are for the weak," Vegeta grumbled, blinking his fatigue away. He finally raised his mug of coffee for some much-needed caffeine. "Vegeta, you haven't been sleeping right for weeks now," Bulma said, shaking her head again as she mixed her hot chocolate. "Your nightmares haven't been this bad in years." The prince lowered his mug with a frown. It was true. Bulma's presence in his bed had slowly, over the course of many years, reduced the frequency of his nightmares to manageable levels. Whereas before he was haunted every night by past tortures, both endured and inflicted, now the nightmares only came back once every month or so. But several weeks ago they had returned with a vengeance. He pushed harder in his training, trying to tire himself to the point of inducing a dreamless sleep, but it didn't work. Bulma's soothing touch and words after he woke from the violent dreams didn't work either. He was frustrated and exhausted. This was an old problem he had learned to endure once upon a time, but he was no longer used to getting so little sleep. However, that did not mean he was about to take medication. He had tried that once long ago, and hadn't liked the side effects. "They will pass," Vegeta finally said as she sat down at the table next to him. He raised his mug for another sip. "They always do." Bulma sighed. "One more week, Vegeta. If you don't get at least 6 good, uninterrupted hours within the next week, you are taking the sleeping pills." "This isn't a negotiation," Vegeta said snidely. "Yes, it is," she told him firmly, looking his exhausted features over. "You're like the Walking Dead, and I can't get any sleep either with you tossing and turning all night. So either you take the deal, or you start sniffing every meal for potential sedatives buried in your food to force you to sleep." The prince glared at his wife and was going to respond when their 5-year-old daughter ran into the kitchen, sobbing almost hysterically. Vegeta winced a little. His head was not up for hearing his daughter's high-pitched wailing. "Mommy," Bra yelled, running right to Bulma. "What's wrong, baby? Why are you crying?" Bulma asked, pushing her chair out enough to pick up her daughter. "My fishies all died." "What? They're all floating in the water. They're all dead, Mommy." "Oh, sweetie, I'm sorry," Bulma said, hugging Bra tightly. She gave Vegeta a confused look and he shrugged with indifference, chugging down his coffee. "Maybe something was wrong with the water. We'll get you new fishies this weekend and you can pick them out this time. What do you say?" Vegeta rolled his eyes and got up. He went to put his mug away and then walked out to the living room, leaving Bulma to handle the latest family crisis. He sat down heavily on the sofa and picked up the remote to turn on their big screen TV to check the weather. If the intense gravity wasn't working, then maybe going somewhere with intense weather would finally push his exhaustion enough to where he could get some sleep. Hell, maybe he could even invite Kakarot for a spar. After all, few things in life made Vegeta feel as good as when he got the chance to punch his rival in the face. Vegeta put on the news channel to wait for the weather to come on. He tossed aside the remote and rubbed at his eyes, frowning as he listened to the news anchor on the TV. "We have an update with the epidemic sweeping across South City. 12 more have died from the mysterious disease which they are now calling Code V. Doctors have reason to suspect that the disease is viral, and are recommending that anyone with the following symptoms please stay home from work and school until we have more information." Scowling and with his eyes closed, Vegeta patted the sofa until he found the remote again. All he wanted was the fucking weather, not a report on the latest disease that was exploiting human weakness. He shook his head quickly, and raised the remote to change the channel when he suddenly froze at what was on the screen before him. Everyone who has been afflicted with this disease has developed this terrible rash right here. A doctor on TV explained, showing pictures of a woman's profile who was already deceased. She had red hair, but right over her temple there was a painful-looking rash that looked almost like a burn in the shape of a V. Her hair was gone around it. We don't know how or why this is happening, but this mark is prevalent on everyone who has died from this disease. They showed another picture of a young boy with the same mark on his temple. If for any reason you or someone you know starts developing the symptoms below, or you start developing a burning sensation near your temple, please check into the hospital right away. As of now, there has been no cure discovered. The TV suddenly turned off. It took a moment for Vegeta to realize that Bulma had walked up to the TV and turned it off, and was staring at him in exasperation. "Didn't you hear me when I asked you to turn that off? Bra's already upset enough, she doesn't need to see those kinds of things, Vegeta." Bulma waited, expecting a fight over turning off the TV while he was watching it, something that always pushed his buttons. Instead, Vegeta just stared at her, his eyes distant and a confused look on his face. Bulma's features softened with concern as she walked up to him. "You okay?" she asked him. He didn't respond until she touched his shoulder. He blinked a few times and looked up at her. "Did you hear about that disease they're calling Code V?" "Yeah, it's really weird. I'm going to call Trunks later and make sure that he's taking care of himself. I know he's got midterms coming up and sometimes he's not as careful as he should be." She waited for a response, but Vegeta was zoned out again, his mind focused on that mark. That mark, the V over the temple, he'd seen it before. There was a short period in his life when he got bored with the regular methods of killing his victims. He had improved his methods of destruction by branding his victims with the mark, burning it into their skin, right over the sides of their heads where it would hurt the most. In his native language, the mark meant prince. It hadn't mattered who it was, old, young, men, women, children. He left all of their corpses with the brand on the sides of their heads, as a statement that the Saiyan prince was the most ruthless being in the universe, second only to Frieza. "Vegeta, honey, just go back to bed. Seriously, you look completely exhausted and kind of pale," Bulma told him worriedly, bringing him out of his thoughts when she ran a hand through his hair. He frowned and reached up to rub his eyes again. That was a long time ago. He was what, a teenager? 18 years old in human years, just like Trunks. He shook his head, trying to rid the images of the TV from his mind. They were taking him back to dark places where he didn't want to go. "I'm fine, woman," he finally growled, picking up the remote again. "And stop fucking turning off the TV when I'm watching it. Do it again and I'll blast you to bits." Bulma almost looked relieved to hear her husband speaking in his usual gruff ways. She gave him a small smile. "All right, Crabpants, since you're back to normal, can you check that tank in Bra's room while I take her to school? I checked it this morning when I woke her up and all the fish were fine. It's really weird that they would all die just like that." "Fish die, big deal, just buy her more," Vegeta said with indifference before getting smacked in the shoulder. "Can you please be a little sensitive, you jerk?" "Fine, how about we cook the fish so they don't go to waste?" Vegeta asked with a smirk. He raised a hand to block the swat aimed at the back of his head. Bulma tried to hit him with her other hand, but he caught that one too and hauled her into his lap as she squealed. "Vegeta, I have to take Bra to school. She can walk," he said with a chuckle, forgetting about the grim newscast as he pulled his wife down into a kiss. For her complaining, Bulma didn't resist him as she deepened their kiss. He managed to get some decent feeling up on his woman when he finally felt his daughter approaching. He pulled away. And knowing what that meant, Bulma pushed herself off him to smooth out her disheveled appearance. She jumped with a start when Vegeta smacked her in the behind, turning to glare at the smirking prince. They both looked over as Bra came down the stairs. The little girl was all dressed, her pink book bag filled and on her back. Bra looked at her parents, her eyes still red from her crying. "Ready to go, sweetie?" Bulma asked gently. Bra nodded quietly. "Baby, I'm sorry about the fishes, but don't worry, Daddy's going to see what went wrong, okay? Come now, go say goodbye to Daddy so we can go." Bra nodded again and walked over to her father. She looked up at him and he could tell she was trying not to cry again when she asked, "Are you really going to check the fishies, Daddy?" Vegeta gave Bulma a subtle glare which she returned with a smug look. He looked back at his daughter. who had her blue hair tied up into side pigtails, and he sighed. He had no favorites with his children and cared about each of them in different but equal ways, but his daughter wore him down so much easier than Trunks ever had when he was her age. He attributed it to his old age making him soft. "Yes, child," the prince finally said. "I will check to see what went wrong so the same thing does not happen again." The little girl beamed and launched herself into his chest. Vegeta grunted in surprise. "Thanks, Daddy," she told him happily before reaching up and kissing him on the cheek. Vegeta frowned and awkwardly patted her on the back. She withdrew from him and flashed him a smile missing a tooth before running over to her mother. Bulma smiled and winked at him, making Vegeta roll his eyes. After they left, he put the news back on. He leaned forward and listened with interest to the reports on the strange new disease, frowning in thought as he did. Finally, when all he was seeing and hearing were things he already knew, he checked the weather. There was going to be some intense heat about 50 miles from the city. Perfect. He got up to get dressed and go fetch that third-class dog Kakarot for a good old-fashioned Saiyan spar, when he remembered that he had to check the fish tank in Bra's room. Grumbling to himself, he went up the stairs to get it over with. Other parents might have just gotten their kindergarten-aged daughter a fish bowl with 1 or 2 fishes. Bulma and Vegeta, though, had put a wall-length, 4-foot-high, first-class aquarium tank in their daughter's room for her 3rd birthday. At night, the tank lit up and gave the room a soft blue that helped Bra sleep when she was learning to do so without her crib. She'd had the same rare, exotic fish since. Vegeta entered his daughter's room and froze at the sight of the tank. Indeed, there were fishes floating above the water, clearly dead. What caught his attention, though, was the fact that the water was completely red. The prince scowled and made his way over to the tank to investigate further. He leaned in close, looking carefully through the glass. Was that blood? How was that possible? His daughter would no doubt have mentioned such a thing, and there was no way the fish could possibly have so much blood to fill the entire tank. Any bleeding should have been diluted. Utterly confused, Vegeta straightened and levitated into the air until he could reach the top of the tank. It was bolted high enough so that Bra could not meddle with it, but it was also out of reach for both him and Bulma. He lifted the top of the tank easily and his nose twitched a little at the strong stench that greeted him. He peered down at all of the fish. All of them were dead. He dipped his hand into the water, scooping a handful of it up, and he blinked in surprise. If he didn't know any better, he would say it was body temperature blood, far from feeling diluted. It felt fresh from a kill. He hadn't felt this type of fresh blood on his hand in years, but it suddenly felt like it was only yesterday. Vegeta frowned and shook his head, wiping his hand on the edge of the tank, and then he examined the fish. He reached down and picked one up. Bringing it up close, he examined it for any sign of bleeding. Turning it over to the other side, his brows furrowed when he didn't see anything unusual. He put the fish back and picked up another. And another, and another. None of them were harmed in any way that he could see that would make the tank so bloodied. He put all of the fish back in, shaking his head in confusion. He was going to need to take the whole tank out of his daughter's room and probably throw the whole thing away. He put the top back on and fastened it as best he could before lifting the entire tank off the wall. Turning around, he walked out, shaking his head the whole time. Must have just been a bizarre fluke thing, and you're making sure you carry the hand sanitizer with you everywhere, right? Bulma asked, balancing her cell phone against her shoulder while she mixed a pot of soup for dinner that night. Bra was sitting at the table behind her, kicking her legs as she drew a picture of her family in her sketchbook. "Mom," Trunks sighed quietly on the other end, glancing back into his dorm room at the half-naked girl laying on his bed. He wouldn't have answered. But he had already ignored one call from his mother. Ignoring a second meant he got a visit from his angry father, and that wouldn't be good tonight. "Don't mom me, Trunks. Those dorms are infested with germs, bacteria, and who knows what else. All I'm asking you to do is be careful." "I am careful. You don't have to worry about that weird code V thing getting to me. I'm half Saiyan, remember, I don't get sick." "Oh yes you do, don't give me that," Bulma argued, right as Vegeta finally walked back in. She looked over at her husband and frowned in disapproval at how dirty and bloodied he was. No doubt a spar with Goku. The prince made eye contact with her and smirked, making her roll her eyes before she mouthed to him not to make a mess on his way upstairs. Now, what is the deal with your poor score on that calculus exam, Trunks? You better not be getting distracted with any hoochies over there, Daddy. Vegeta grunted in acknowledgement as he removed his dirty boots. What's a hoochie? The little girl whispered. Vegeta chuckled and left his boots outside before slowly walking over to Bra. His spar with his rival had been just what the doctor ordered. He was sure that a hot shower, followed by the delicious dinner Bulma was preparing, would do the trick and that he would probably get 2 whole days of dreamless sleep. Don't worry about that, he whispered back. He leaned down, resting his hands on his knees as he got close to his daughter. Daddy, you stink, Bra told him, her nose crinkling in disgust. Chen, so much like your mother, Vegeta grumbled before his expression turned serious as he carefully regarded his daughter. Bra, I had to take that whole tank out of your bedroom. Yeah, I saw, Bra said quietly, pouting a little as she looked down at her drawing. Before you left for school, did you see anything strange with the tank? Vegeta asked her quietly. What do you mean? How was the water? I dunno. Looked okay to me, Bra said with a shrug. Vegeta frowned and fell into thought, and so Bra asked, why? No reason, he smoothly answered, looking over her shoulder. What are you drawing? This is us. See, that's Mommy, that's me, and that's you, and that's Trunks with Goten. Chen, Vegeta grunted, a smirk of amusement spreading over his face at the drawing. Bulma's head was ridiculously large and Vegeta was way too tall. A very goofy-looking Trunks was playing video games with an even goofier-looking Goten, and Bra was standing alone with a sun around her. What do you think? I think it's perfect, princess, he whispered in her ear as if telling her a secret. Bra beamed with pride as Vegeta straightened and walked away to take a much-needed hot shower. The rest of the night passed by as it normally did. The 3 sat down and had dinner together. While Bra told her parents everything that happened at school, Bulma updated her husband and daughter on Trunks and how he was doing. Vegeta just ate and listened as best he could, but by this point he was completely exhausted. The adrenaline of the spar he'd done was washing off and he finished his dinner with extraordinary effort. Just because there was still a hint of masochism in him that would never fully disappear, Vegeta forced himself to engage in one last training session before bed. He wasn't going to take chances. He needed to sleep. And he was going to beat his body into the ground to make sure that he was far too tired to dream. He did an hour of hard work and then went back upstairs for another shower. When he walked out of the shower, though, he was met face to face with his angry wife. Didn't I tell you not to make a fucking mess when you came in, Vegeta? Bulma hissed at him. Vegeta frowned at her. What the hell are you babbling about, woman? He barked as he wrapped a towel around himself. You left blood and dirt footprints all over Bra's room. Vegeta froze and rapidly replayed the events of the day. He hadn't gone to his daughter's room when he came back from his spar with Goku. He'd come straight to where he was now, taken a shower, and then gone back downstairs to join his family for dinner, hadn't he? That was you, right, Vegeta? Bulma asked worriedly, cutting the tense silence. His brows furrowed as he looked his wife in the eye. After a few seconds, he shrugged, looked away, and grumbled a non-committal. Must have happened when I was taking the tank out. Vegeta left out the fact that he was barefoot at the time he'd done so, and had made sure nothing was spilled. But he was also fighting fatigue that would have crippled nearly anyone else. Maybe he had accidentally wandered into his daughter's room after the spar after all. But hadn't he removed his dirty boots before even entering the house? Well, just be more careful, okay? It took a while to clean and get that smell of blood out of her room. Vegeta nodded distantly, still looking off to the side, and Bulma reached out to his face. He turned his gaze to her and she kissed him briefly on the lips. I'll have Bra come in to say goodnight so you can get some sleep. No, I'll go say goodnight to the child in her room, Vegeta surprised her by saying. Bulma blinked a bit but finally smiled and nodded. Even better. She kissed him again and left the room to continue getting her daughter ready for bed. As soon as she did, Vegeta went over and sat down at the edge of his bed. Something was wrong, and he didn't like it. He ran his hand down over his face. He scowled and thought to himself for a while, mentally doing a Kai sweep. No one was there except his wife and his daughter. Bulma's parents had moved out years ago to give the pair their privacy while they raised their children, but they weren't very far. He shook his head and then stood up. He exchanged his towel for a pair of comfortable shorts, and then went over to check on the only two women in the universe that he cared about. Vegeta leaned his shoulder against the doorframe to his daughter's room, crossing his arms over his chest. He relaxed at the sight of them in bed together while Bulma read a book. They both glanced up at him and he nodded in acknowledgement. When they turned back to their task, Vegeta swept the room with a critical eye that he hadn't used in years. He examined every last inch of the room until his gaze finally settled on the carpet. Bulma had scrubbed the blood, but his trained eye could still see the small pigments of red in the pink carpet of their daughter's room. Footsteps, walking up to his daughter's bed, that was where they stopped. His stomach churned as his lip twitched. The tank wasn't in that direction. It had been bolted to the opposite wall. He took in a breath of air. A human would have only smelled the air freshener, but Vegeta could also smell the faded blood, the lingering smell of dead fish, his wife's perfume, his daughter's shampoo, and his own distinct scent from earlier. No one else had been in this room. He frowned in confusion as he looked back down to the carpet. Had it actually been him? Was he really just losing his mind? Vegeta, Bulma called out to him. He snapped out of it and pushed himself off the door. Bulma walked past him, letting her fingertips graze his arm on her way past. He nodded to her and walked over to his daughter's bed, purposely following the barely visible tracks. Still, he smelled nothing. Vegeta finally sat down on the edge of Bra's bed as she snuggled deeper into her blankets. He glanced at her briefly before looking down at the carpet by his bare feet, frowning as he did. "It wasn't you, was it, Daddy?" Bra whispered. Vegeta immediately looked back at her in surprise. "What? Mommy said it was you, but I saw you take off your boots when you came in." "It was from earlier, when I was taking out the tank," Vegeta replied with an indifferent shrug, not wanting to frighten her. "But when I came home from school, Bra," Vegeta said firmly. "It was me, end of story." "I don't think so," Bra meekly said, burying herself even more in her blankets. "Who else would it be, Brat? The bad people." "The who now?" "There are bad people in my room, Daddy." "No one has been in your room, child. You watch far too much television," Vegeta grumbled, already making a mental note to talk to Bulma about reducing the little girl's hours. "Nah, I hear them sometimes saying your name." Vegeta shifted over a bit. He reached over and put his palm on the other side of his daughter so he was leaning over her. He could see her visibly relax at the gesture of protection. "You want to know a secret, kid?" Vegeta asked quietly. She nodded eagerly as he smirked. "There isn't one person on this planet who your father can't scare the living daylights out of." Bra giggled. "I already knew that. Then you know that as long as I'm here there will never be any bad people in your room, correct?" "Yes, good, now sleep," he said, drawing away as he stood up. "Good night, Daddy. Good night." He watched her for a second before walking around her bed over to the window as he scanned it over. Exceptionally overprotective of his daughter. He had chosen her room to be on the 3rd floor, one above his and Bulma's. There was no easy way for a human to reach the little girl's room. He had even gone so far as making his wife put up steel bars across the outside of the window. Vegeta looked over his shoulder at his daughter to make sure she was asleep, and then checked the bars. He applied enough strength of a powerful human, but not enough strength for him to break the bars. They were rock steady. Nothing could possibly break those bars without him hearing it in his bedroom. And if he ever caught anyone trying, he would kill them without hesitation. He might have been reformed or whatever, but he was not above ripping someone's head off if they threatened his family. Bulma knew what Vegeta would do to anyone who dared trespass in their home with ill intent, and had an extensive security system put into place to try to avoid anyone being murdered on her property. Criminal or not, the alarms would have been triggered first before anyone got to Bra's bedroom window. He frowned and closed the window again. Minutes later, Vegeta walked back into the bedroom he shared with his wife. Bulma was sitting up in bed reading over a magazine. She briefly glanced up at him before going back to her reading. "How'd it go?" "Fine," he answered curtly. He walked over to the screen door leading to the balcony, shut it closed, and then locked it. "Cold, no," he answered, testing the lock's strength. "It was fine enough." He drew the curtains closed and then added, "Just not sleeping here tonight." "What?" Bulma asked, looking back up at him. "Why not? You're not sleeping well with me here. I will spend a few days sleeping in a guest room until things are under control," he explained, walking back around the bed. "Vegeta, I really don't mind." The prince sighed deeply as he looked over at her. Woman, I won't be gone long. Well, all right. Bulma sighed as he came up to her. He surprised her by giving her a deep, passionate kiss. Try to sleep well without me, foolish woman, he whispered teasingly. Oh, whatever, Bulma laughed, shoving him away. He smirked and turned away, walking out of the room and closing the door behind him. Vegeta's smirk disappeared as a focused look settled over his features. He did another Kai sweep before prowling the compound, his senses on alert. He made sure all of the alarms were properly engaged, before finally walking back upstairs after he was satisfied with everything. Instead of going to a guest room, though, he went back to his daughter's room. He cracked open the door and peeked in, but everything was as he left it. Bra was sleeping peacefully and soundly. He frowned and closed the door again, before finally deciding that maybe it was just his exhaustion getting to him. He finally fell into his first deep sleep in a long time, sitting upright on the outside of his daughter's door. You must be Tenchi. I am looking for the Zeigen mineral, the 18-year-old boy said in a gruff, clipped voice. His tail was waving lazily behind him, a mark of his growing impatience as he crossed his arms over his chest. I was told that you were the one who could lead me to it. Take me to it, and no more of your people will die. The elderly blue alien woman was shaking almost uncontrollably from her fear. The young man standing in front of her had effortlessly led a purge that had resulted in the slaughter of over half the population of her planet. Now he was promising to spare the rest in exchange for the most precious mineral on her planet. But one good look into the soulless and ruthless black eyes of the teenager in front of her, and Tenchi already knew that this boy would not keep his word. As the oldest matriarch on the planet at over 650 years old, she was the sole guardian of the planet's most sacred mineral. She could not hand it over to the teenaged boy in front of her, knowing that he was going to turn around and hand it over to the cruel and sadistic Frieza. The mineral had powers beyond anyone's imagination. May the gods help the universe if Frieza uncovered the true secrets and potential of such a rare mineral. The Zeigen is a holy mineral. She tried to reason with him as a last resort. Tenchi shook her head, her pleading eyes meeting his. Please, son, I cannot, Vegeta snarled and backhanded her hard, sending her crashing to the dirt. She let out a cry of both pain and terror as he put his boot firmly on the back of her head. I am not your fucking son, you old whore, Vegeta hissed venomously, applying painful pressure with his foot that had the woman in tears on the ground. And I don't care how holy this mineral is. Frieza wants it, and therefore Frieza will get it. I am offering you a deal. You would be wise to take it. When he was met with a stubborn silence, the teenager sighed. He raised a hand up to his scouter and activated the communications link. Nappa, Raditz, bring them out so this bitch can talk, he ordered harshly. Reaching down, Vegeta grabbed the elderly guardian by the hair, brutally hauling her up to her feet. He dragged her with him as he walked for a few minutes, completely indifferent to her weak struggling. He could practically smell her terror, but all that did was encourage him even more. Finally, he forced her down to her knees. The old woman looked like she aged another 650 years when she saw Raditz and Nappa both standing with almost 100 completely terrified children in front of them. They were all her descendants, none over the human equivalent of 10 years old. So you were saying? Vegeta asked in a sweet voice from behind her. Don't harm them, they are just children. Oh, I know. And believe me, I love children. I will thoroughly enjoy conversing with each and every one of your kin for the answers you refuse to give me. Tenchi was shaking with red tears staining her face. She looked into the eyes of the children in front of her and didn't know if she had the heart to fulfill her duty and watch them pay the price. There was a low, throaty growl behind her. The vibrations of it carried Vegeta's brewing and almost tangible rage. How a boy so young could be filled with so much hatred. She would never know. Maybe you still need some persuasion, Vegeta snarled from behind her. He raised one hand glowing with Kai at the group in front of him, his hand slowly drifting to the side as he tried to pick his target. Chen, there are so many children, where do I begin? He mused out loud. No, don't, I will tell you where the Zeigen is, Tenchi finally said, her voice hoarse with desperation and regret. Do you promise to leave us in peace? Vegeta chuckled and lowered his hand, crossing his arms over his chest. That was my original offer, was it not? There was silence for a few tense seconds. The children all glanced at each other, hope in their eyes that they might live through this yet. It's deep in the base of the tallest mountain here. The Zeijin is a bright and pure silver color. It is unbreakable. You will find all that you need. Both of you go retrieve it. Now, Vegeta ordered. Already on it. Raditz immediately responded, as Nappa nodded. They both turned around and took off into the air to go retrieve the rare mineral. Well, now that we've gotten that out of the way, Vegeta shoved Tenchi back down to the sand with his boot, and to her horror, he raised one hand and fired a Kai blast that killed almost half of the children on sight. The survivors all screamed and started running desperately to escape. Vegeta raised his other hand and systematically fired Kai blasts that blew out the legs of every last one of them, ending any possible hope of escape. "What are you doing?" Tenchi shrieked in horror. Vegeta snickered as he finally lowered both of his hands, looking down at her in clear amusement. "What's it look like, you old bat? Business is over. It's time for fun," he told her in a playful voice. "You promised." Vegeta smirked a cruel smirk. "I don't recall ever saying those words." "Please have mercy," she pleaded to him as he started walking over to the closest child writhing in agony and bleeding in the dirt, a young girl. His face was hard with hatred when he looked back at her, his voice ice cold as he spat out, "Mercy is for the weak." Vegeta forced the child's head to the side with his boot and raised his hand, which started glowing with Kai. He smirked as he heard the child's ensuing screams of excruciating pain while he brutally engraved his new V brand. After only a few seconds, though, things rapidly began to change. The teenager blinked in surprise as the alien child changed under his foot. The blue skin had paled and the alien now had blue hair. The screams became painfully familiar, and Vegeta removed his boot immediately. He stared at the girl in wide-eyed horror as he recognized her as his young daughter, pigtails and all. "Oh gods!" Vegeta choked out, no longer a teenaged boy. He staggered backwards, reeling from emotional shock before looking up around him. All of the children that he brutally tortured and slaughtered that day were now standing and surrounding him, staring at him with hate-filled, vengeful red eyes. Sooner or later, Vegeta, they all chanted in unison. "You will pay for what you've done." Vegeta woke up with a violent start, sitting straight up as he gasped for air. The prince looked around frantically, half expecting to see haunting red eyes staring back at him. The only thing that greeted him was the darkness of his home. He was still sitting upright outside Bra's bedroom door. He swallowed heavily, leaning back against the door. Closing his eyes, he took a deep breath to bring his heartbeat down. His eyes were hurting from how tired he was, and the pounding in his head told him he hadn't gotten more than an hour of sleep. He raised a hand up and rubbed his eyes, trying to make himself forget the nightmare that had been relentlessly haunting him over the last few weeks. It was the massacre that sparked his reputation across the galaxies as Frieza's deadliest warrior. The violence he'd inflicted that day had topped anything he'd ever done before, and he had relished in every last second of it. Every scream had only heightened the experience, and he had fed off the terror of his victims to a degree that would have left Frieza proud. Vegeta himself had been proud afterwards, even boasting over the creative ways that he had tortured every last child right to their dying breath, all in front of the elderly matriarch's eyes. The prince looked down a little, regret thick in his throat. As if the pure flashback wasn't hard enough to relive, it was compounded by the twisted ending his mind kept throwing in. The words the children spoke were the last words Tenchi had told him right before he brutally killed her. Between that and seeing his daughter as a casualty of his mindless violence, it never failed to leave him feeling deeply shaken and unable to go back to sleep. Once he regained his composure, Vegeta slowly got up to his feet. He turned and cracked the door open to his daughter's room for his own peace of mind. He watched her sleeping soundly for a few seconds to let his mind rid the horrible images of her mutilated body at his feet. Finally, he sighed and closed the door quietly. Vegeta headed back to his bedroom to get into his training gear since sleep wasn't happening that night. He entered quietly, briefly glancing at Bulma when he did. She was sound asleep on her side at the edge of the bed with her back to him. He moved in complete silence as he got dressed in the darkness. Right before he left, though, he walked over to the edge of the bed. He hesitated for a second before squatting down. He leaned forward and gently rested his forehead in the nape of Bulma's neck as he closed his eyes. She stirred a little at the contact, but didn't wake up. Vegeta breathed in quietly, letting his wife's scent and presence soothe him and rid the dark memories from his mind. After about a minute, he withdrew and left their room for an early round in the gravity room, his nightmare finally fading to the background. Bulma was the only one who noticed that Bra was unusually quiet that morning during breakfast. The little girl was a morning person, unlike herself, Vegeta, and Trunks, who were all natural night owls. She only needed to come into her daughter's room once and the girl was awake, a far cry from the morning wars that had been waged trying to wake up Trunks to go to school. Usually, Bra talked everyone's ear off during breakfast, but she was just silently staring down into her bowl of cereal. She had barely touched it. Across from their daughter, Vegeta was oblivious to the world as he slowly ate his breakfast. Bulma looked at him and sighed when she saw his eyes drifting closed as he briefly paused cutting a piece of bacon. She made a mental note to get him the sleeping medication after she took Bra to school, whether he liked it or not. Sitting down with her own plate of food, Bulma glanced over at her daughter. The little girl was pushing her cereal into the milk and then watching as it floated back up when she stopped, over and over. "You okay, kiddo?" Bulma finally asked, making Vegeta jerk awake. Bulma glanced at him, shaking her head as he picked up his large thermos of coffee. Bra nodded, not looking up as she rested one elbow on the table, cradling her head in her hand. Bulma frowned. "Are you sure?" Bulma pressed. The little girl nodded again. Bulma wasn't convinced but let it go for now. "Did you want me to make you some scrambled eggs?" Bra shook her head and finally said, "I'm not hungry, mommy." Bulma looked over at Vegeta, and this time he made eye contact with her. Their daughter had inherited her father's appetite. Though she didn't eat nearly what Trunks did at her age, she still easily ate more than 4 times the normal amount a human girl at her age would eat. She could normally put down 5 bowls of cereal in the morning. Bra not having an appetite was more than a bit unusual, and they both knew it. Vegeta took a drink from his coffee before turning his bloodshot eyes to his daughter. "What's wrong?" he demanded, his tone harsher than usual due to his exhaustion. Bra squirmed a little under her father's gaze before looking down at the table. Her voice was so quiet that Bulma had to lean in a bit to hear her response. "I don't want to sleep in my room anymore." Vegeta raised an eyebrow as Bulma said, "Baby, we're going this weekend to get you your new fish tank stocked up with all the prettiest fishes you can find. I know you're not used to the night light that I put in last night," but Bra shook her head and cut in. "It's not the light." "What is it then?" Bulma asked. "I'm scared," the little girl meekly confessed. "I keep hearing the bad people in my room at night. They killed my fishies, they said so." Vegeta exhaled through his nose in annoyance as Bulma gently responded, "Bra, there is no one in your room, it's all in your imagination." "No, it's not, I hear them, they're there." Bra insisted. She looked over at her father pleadingly, and Vegeta sighed before leaning towards his daughter a bit. "Tell you what, kid," he said, his tone losing its harsh edge. "The next time you hear these so-called bad people, you tell them to come talk to me. I will blast them to pieces," he told her in a mock-serious voice. Bra couldn't help but giggle as Vegeta smirked. "Okay," the little girl said, visibly put at ease as she suddenly started eating her cereal. Vegeta looked over at his wife, who flashed him a dazzling smile. He was momentarily captivated, before shaking his head and sighing as he went back to eating his breakfast. These 2 females had made him so soft. "Baby, I put the picture you drew on the fridge," Bulma said, making Bra look over. The little girl beamed with excitement. "Thanks, Mommy, Daddy said my drawing was perfect," the little girl said, her tone clearly proud. Vegeta chuckled. "Well, you certainly got the size of your mother's head right," he said, glancing up at Bulma with a smirk. She rolled her eyes at him. "It's because Mommy is so smart that her brain is bigger than everyone else's," Bra reasoned, as if it was the most logical thing in the world. Bulma laughed. "Thanks, sweetie." Their breakfast was much better after that. Soon Bra ran upstairs to start getting ready for school while Bulma checked her emails on her smartphone. She glanced up at her husband when he finally stood up before looking down at her phone again. "How many hours did you get last night?" Bulma asked knowingly. Vegeta frowned and turned around to give her his back as he opened the fridge. 12, he sarcastically spat out, digging for a water bottle. He couldn't find one. Vegeta, if you ever sleep for 12 hours without it being because you passed out, I'll take you straight to the hospital. 8, Shen, he grunted before closing the fridge. As soon as the door closed, Bra's family drawing fell to the floor. Vegeta blinked in surprise before squatting down. He finally stood and turned around, holding his daughter's drawing, which was ripped into 2 pieces now. His brows were furrowed as he stared at the torn drawing of their family. Bulma briefly glanced up at him before doing a double take. Vegeta, she cried out in exasperation. Can't you be more careful? But I didn't, Vegeta muttered, shaking his head in utter confusion as he turned back to look at the fridge as if he would find answers there. How the hell had the drawing torn? He hadn't even touched it. All he did was close the fridge door. The prince looked back down at the drawing. Bra had drawn him first at the far left. The tear had cut him clean off from the rest of his family in the drawing. Vegeta didn't know why, but he suddenly felt uneasy as he stared down at the 2 separate pieces. He wasn't aware that Bulma had walked up to him until she took the torn drawing out of his hands. I'll fix this before she notices, Bulma sighed, turning from him. She opened a drawer and tucked the drawing away. When she looked back and saw her husband staring blankly at the fridge, she sighed again. And after I drop off Bra at school, I am getting you some sleeping medication. You're starting to really worry me, Vegeta. To her surprise, Vegeta nodded his acceptance after only a few seconds. Fine, good, you'll feel better after some real rest, Bulma said, giving him a quick kiss on the lips. Besides, Trunks is stopping by this weekend, and you should be well rested so you can spend time with him. Vegeta rolled his eyes. Woman, you hound the boy too much. On this planet, he is a man now. He does not need to be here every weekend. Let him be. Bulma huffed indignantly. Trunks is only 18. 18-year-old boys need direction, Vegeta, or they'll get away from you. The prince frowned, suddenly remembering his vivid nightmares that featured him at the same age as his son. He looked away and reluctantly nodded. You have a point, he relented, right as Bra ran back in, her jacket and book bag on. I'm ready, mommy. Let's go, she yelled out in excitement. Bulma laughed. All right, we're going, she said, heading back over to the table to get her phone so they could go. Bra ran over to Vegeta, charging right into his midsection. The prince grunted in surprise as his daughter hugged him around his waist, resting her head against his stomach. He frowned a little. I love you, Daddy. Vegeta sighed and put a gentle hand on top of her head, before quietly giving his usual response. Thank you, Princess. The little girl looked up at him with a bright smile, before taking off running out of the kitchen. Vegeta's gaze shifted over to his wife, who was smiling at him. What? He snapped, turning around and giving her his back as a blush spread over his features. Nothing, Bulma chuckled, coming up behind him. She kissed him on the back of his head and he grunted in response. I'll see you later. Fine, he replied, watching out of the corner of his eye as Bulma left the kitchen. As soon as she did, Vegeta turned his gaze back to the fridge. He looked at it warily as he once again wondered how the hell the picture had ripped. There was a strange feeling in his gut that was making the hair on the back of his neck rise. He rubbed the back of his neck and frowned, walking out of the kitchen. He must have been more out of it than he thought. About 4 hours later, Vegeta was sprawled out on the sofa, in a deep sleep from the medication that Bulma had given him. She was sitting next to him, an enthralling crime thriller novel in her left hand. She had her right arm resting on her husband's chest while he had one arm thrown back over her legs. The compound was silent, and it was something to take advantage of as she got completely absorbed in her novel. Bulma bit her bottom lip as she got to the bottom of a page. She raised her right hand to turn the page, when she suddenly got the frightening sensation of someone breathing on the back of her neck. Bulma immediately got up and spun around, her heartbeat racing, but there was no one there. She looked around in confusion before raising one wary hand to her neck. Her gaze lowered and settled on Vegeta as she briefly wondered if he was just using his superhuman speed to screw with her. But he hadn't stirred from her abrupt movement, his steady breathing uninterrupted. All right, that's enough of this book, Bulma mumbled to herself, taking a deep breath as she settled her nerves. She tossed aside the book in exchange for the TV remote as she settled in next to Vegeta again. She gently lifted him up a little and scooted over so his head was on her lap, wanting the reassurance of being closer to him. Vegeta muttered something under his breath, but didn't rouse as Bulma rested her arm on his chest again. Bulma turned the TV on and inwardly groaned when she saw that the only thing on TV were the reports on that strange disease, Code V. She bit her bottom lip as she watched the statistics circulating. She paid close attention to a map that they showed, highlighting prevalent areas that were being affected. Her home and West City College, where Trunks was a freshman, thankfully weren't anywhere close. After a few minutes, she decided to access the channel guide, not wanting to hear anything more about the disturbing new disease. In the split second that the screen went black as the information loaded up, Bulma saw the reflection of herself on the sofa with her sleeping husband. And standing behind the sofa, leaning over them, she saw a black silhouette with red eyes. Bulma screamed. Vegeta was awake and on his feet immediately, his right hand already glowing. With Kai as he scanned over where he was. He blinked heavily a few times, his hazy eyes settling on Bulma as his brain slowly processed where he was. Finally, he extinguished his Kai and cocked his head to one side as he watched her. Bulma was glancing back and forth from the TV to her side over the sofa, her face drained of color. He was about to ask what was wrong when Bulma spoke up first. "I saw someone, Vegeta," she said warily, addressing him even though she wasn't looking at him. Vegeta growled low in his throat. He felt horribly drowsy and sluggish from the medication and didn't feel up for this. "Woman, it's bad enough that the girl already thinks there are imaginary beings in her bedroom. As pathetic as that is, she is a child, so she has some semblance of an excuse. You, on the other hand, are an adult and a supposed genius to boot. So don't give me this bullshit," Vegeta sneered angrily. "You didn't see," Bulma shot back, now turning her full attention to him. She pointed right at the TV. "There was someone standing over both of us, Vegeta." "No one has been here," Vegeta growled, his eyes narrowing. Honestly, it was as though he was just a scrub human with how little Bra and Bulma believed him. "I would be able to smell them." But Bulma sputtered, looking nervously over the side of the sofa again. She turned back at the TV and powered it off, but this time could only see herself and Vegeta in the reflection. Her brows furrowed in confusion. "But I saw someone," Bulma, Vegeta sighed, reaching up to briefly rub at his eyes. "It was probably just your brain playing a trick on you. You haven't been sleeping properly either because of me." Bulma took a deep breath, her eyes finally settling on her husband, who was looking at her with clear exasperation. His explanation was logical, and after a moment she accepted it and nodded. "I'm sorry I woke you," she said guiltily, and Vegeta rolled his eyes. "It's fine," he said in a gruff voice, waving a hand at her in dismissal as he headed upstairs to lay down. He hated when he felt sluggish like this, a reason why he hated taking sleeping medication. But on the flip side, he hadn't seen a thing in his sleep. It was a trade-off that was certainly worth it. Bulma spoke up hesitantly as he reached the stairs. Vegeta glanced back at her and raised an eyebrow. "Would you mind staying down here, please?" The prince reached up and pinched the bridge of his nose. Finally, he sighed deeply and walked back over to the sofa. He sat down on it, and Bulma was leaning against his side a second later. Vegeta put his arm protectively around her, shaking his head as he did. "I thought I only had 2 children to deal with," he grumbled before he yawned. Bulma pinched him by his ribs and he flinched a little. "If I had a penny every time you acted childish during the last 20 years, Capsule Corp would be worth twice what it is now." Vegeta chuckled as she turned the television back on. He managed to watch about 5 minutes before he leaned his head back and closed his eyes. He was out again shortly afterwards, and Bulma eventually relaxed against him. After all, with Vegeta by her side both literally and figuratively, nothing could ever happen to her. "Woman, this is completely absurd," Vegeta growled angrily later that night. Bulma ignored him as she continued working on what she was doing. "I cannot believe you are actually doing this." "Well, maybe if you wouldn't be opposed to Bra sleeping in our bed with us, then this wouldn't be an issue," Bulma snapped at him. "The child has to conquer her ridiculous fears on her own. Caving into it will only make it more difficult for her to sleep alone later. She has to learn." "Well, tough guy, guess what? She's a little girl and she needs to sleep. This will give her a good peace of mind without her needing to sleep with us." "This is only acknowledging that there is a problem when there isn't one," Vegeta sneered, watching in staunch disapproval as Bulma synchronized up the old sound monitors. She had put them into the cribs of their children when they were both babies so she could hear them on the other end, and he was disgusted as she brought them out again. "Oh, and how about your promise to blast away these imaginary bad people? Was that not acknowledging the problem?" Bulma teased. Glancing up at him, Vegeta glared at her in response before looking away. Shen. He spun on his heel and disappeared into the bathroom in their bedroom, slamming the door shut behind him. Bulma shook her head, sitting back as she turned on the sound monitors. For some reason, it had taken far too long to pick up the proper radio frequency. There had been a lot of strange static noise that she had to actually dismantle the monitors to fix. Truth be told, this was as much for her peace of mind as it was for Bra's. She put one end on the nightstand by her side of the bed right as her daughter walked in. The little girl was wearing one of Trunks' high school football sweaters, which dwarfed her and came down past her knees. She was carrying her stuffed bear as she walked over to her mother. Bulma gave her daughter a smile, opening her arms to her. Bra readily settled herself into her mother's embrace, clutching her bear tightly. "It's okay, baby girl," Bulma whispered in her ear, before kissing her temple. "We're going to set up this monitor in your room, so if anything weird is going on, Daddy and I will hear. So you sleep easy, okay?" Bra nodded, looking over the sound monitors. The reassurance calmed her, even though what she really wanted was to sleep in Bulma and Vegeta's bed right between her parents. The little girl, though, was developing a bit of a pride streak, which was perhaps inevitable given who her parents were. She didn't want to outright ask, telling herself that if her parents could hear her, everything would be fine. Vegeta emerged from the bathroom a moment later, flicking the light off behind him. He settled his gaze on them and Bulma nudged Bra towards him. Vegeta bent over, putting his hands on his knees as his daughter approached him. "Good night, Daddy," she said, kissing him on the cheek. "Good night, Bra," he responded, letting her hug him around his neck. "Remember what I said, anyone scares you, you tell them to come talk to me," he whispered in her ear. She nodded against him and let him go, giving him a small smile before going back over to Bulma, who was extending her hand to her. The little girl took her mother's hand and they both left the room. Vegeta watched them leave before closing his eyes and slowly rotating his head in an effort to crack his neck. He glanced at the nightstand, and by the sound monitor was the bottle of pills to help him sleep. He frowned and picked it up, contemplating. After a few seconds, he put it back down. He had slept for almost 5 whole hours earlier that day and he felt considerably better. He didn't need them tonight. The prince walked out of his bedroom and did a Kai scan, glancing upstairs where he could feel Bulma with Bra. He looked around before engaging in a late-night sweep of the compound. He made a stop in the kitchen to chug down a glass of water, all the while straining his hearing. He couldn't hear anything, and finally went back upstairs when he was satisfied. He stripped down until he was only in his shorts and climbed into bed. Since he had gotten a good amount of rest earlier, he had agreed to give sleeping in his bed with his wife a try. He laid on his back and crossed his arms behind his head. He could hear Bulma and Bra's voices through the monitor, and that helped put him more at ease. He closed his eyes and was soon asleep. Some time later, Vegeta yawned and forced his eyes open. His room was dark now, and Bulma was next to him, sound asleep. Vegeta squinted over at the time, 3:12 a.m. He rested his head back and sighed in relief, another sleep without nightmares. Things seemed to finally be going back to normal. He was drifting off again when there was a rustle of static. The prince frowned and the rustling grew. He opened his eyes and looked beyond his wife at the nightstand. The lights on the sound monitor were flaring up. Vegeta raised an eyebrow as he rolled to his side, stretching over Bulma to reach the monitor. He glanced down at his wife, making sure he didn't wake her as he pulled the monitor towards him. The prince sat up in bed, bringing the monitor up close to his ear. The rustling was periodic. Finally, after a few seconds, Vegeta realized it was just his daughter breathing. He yawned and was going to put the monitor back when the lights flared up all the way. He froze, staring down at the device. The rustling was gone. He then heard an angry voice that wasn't his daughter's, whispering her name. Less than a fraction of a second later, Vegeta threw open the door to his daughter's room. His teal eyes scanned over the room that was only lit by a small nightlight in the corner. Finally, his sight settled on his daughter. The little girl was standing at the window with her back to him. Vegeta's brows furrowed a bit, a chill running down his spine for no reason he could place. "Brah," he asked warily. She didn't answer him. Vegeta glanced around the room again and walked over to the little girl's closet. He checked it to make sure no one was hiding there. Confusion etched in his features. There was no one alive who could leave the room faster than he had shown up. His sense of smell also said that no one had been in the room. Finally, he walked over to stand at his daughter's side. Bra was staring blankly out the window. Her blue hair was damp with sweat, and it was only then that Vegeta noticed that it was incredibly hot and stuffy in the room. He squatted down next to the little girl, losing his Super Saiyan transformation as he did. "Brah?" he asked again. His daughter blinked a bit as though coming out of a daze. She looked over at her father with unhindered fear in her blue eyes. "The bad people are mad, Daddy," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "What? They're mad that I told you about them," Bra said in complete dismay before running right into him. She hugged him tightly around his neck and whimpered in his ear, "I'm scared." "It's all right," Vegeta reassured her quietly. He easily lifted her up against him with one arm as he stood up, using his other hand to rub her back. Bra buried her face into the side of his neck as she clung to him tightly. "There is nothing to fear except this absurd heat in your bedroom. It seems to me that you'll be sleeping with your mother and me until we get that fixed. What do you think?" he asked her lightly, his earlier words with his wife long forgotten. Bra nodded against him before squeaking out, "Can I bring Runo?" Vegeta sighed. "Yes, child," he said, walking over and reaching down with his free hand to retrieve her stuffed bear. He handed it to her and Bra immediately latched onto it, practically burying it against Vegeta's throat as she tried to hold onto them both equally. Vegeta rubbed her back again as he turned and carried her out of her room. He walked into his own room, going over to Bulma's side of the bed. Reaching down with his free hand, he touched his wife on the arm. "Woman," he quietly said, watching as Bulma sighed deeply before squinting up at him. When she saw that he had their daughter in his arms, she scooted back. Vegeta bent over a bit, lowering the little girl to the bed. Bra instantly crawled into her mother's arms. "SHH, it's okay, baby," Bulma whispered tiredly, glancing up at Vegeta. He frowned and mouthed to her that he would be right back and then turned and headed back out. Vegeta scoured every last inch of the dark compound with a silent stalking that once made him the most dangerous adversary in the universe. Eventually, though, he found himself back in his daughter's room. One glance at the thermostat had his brows furrowing. It was over 90 degrees in the room. He flipped up the controls and turned the air conditioning on, immediately feeling the rush of cool air. The prince then turned around and stared into the darkness of the room, as though staring at an invisible enemy. After a tense few minutes, he frowned and shook his head. This was absurd. There was no one there. He was wasting his time. A minute later, Vegeta crawled into his own bed. Bulma was hugging Bra from behind, and the girl had finally fallen asleep with her mother close. The prince protectively wrapped an arm around his wife from behind, settling himself against her. "What happened?" Bulma whispered to him. "Nothing. She was frightened, so I brought her here." "Go to sleep," he whispered back. There was silence for a while. Before Bulma whispered again, "Vegeta, HN, do you get the feeling that something is really wrong here?" "Like what?" "I don't know, like we're not alone." "No, stop talking nonsense and go to sleep," Vegeta gruffly said. "You need to stop reading those ridiculous books. They are poisoning your mind." Bulma sighed before closing her eyes. "Yeah, maybe. Rest, woman." And so she did. Vegeta stayed awake for hours, though, listening to them both breathing. He didn't fall asleep again until the sun started to rise. There was a violent wave of blood that crashed into Vegeta, forcing the Saiyan down to the floor. The blood washed over him and overwhelmed him, going into his nose and mouth until he was desperately gasping for air. Fire suddenly rose up around him and quickly surrounded him. The prince tried to get up, but he suddenly collapsed back to the floor, grabbing onto his head with both hands, his eyes squeezed painfully shut. The flames spread at a dangerous speed, flaring with rage while Vegeta writhed in helpless agony. "Do you think he's had enough for one day?" a haunting voice asked. "You're asking to show him mercy, but mercy is for the weak," another cold voice responded as Vegeta opened his mouth in a silent scream. "Dad," Trunks breathed out as he shot up in bed immediately, drenched in sweat. His blue eyes were unfocused as he looked around his messy dorm room. He reached up and brushed his sweaty hair off his forehead, and then closed his eyes to seek out his father's energy signal for his own reassurance. It only took him a second to pick it out. His father was home and strong as ever. There was nothing amiss with the signal Trunks was sensing. He focused a little more and could tell by the subtle fluctuations of Kai that Vegeta was training. Trunks let out a relieved sigh, reaching up to rub the back of his neck. There was still an odd feeling he couldn't shake, though, a feeling that something was wrong. He started picking up his father's energy signal again when there was a stirring in the bed with him. "Awake already? Thought for sure that you'd sleep in until noon," a husky and flirtatious voice said. Trunks barely noticed the sensation of a well-manicured nail trailing lightly down his bare back. Yeah, sure," the teenager said absent-mindedly, still shaken up from his nightmare. He reached down and removed his blankets, sitting up on the edge of his bed. He picked up his boxers and pulled them on as he stood up, scowling as he did. Sensing Vegeta wasn't enough, he had to actually talk to him. Hearing his father's voice was the only thing that would make the feeling of dread in his stomach go away. "I'll be right back. I need to call my dad and talk to him." Trunks was immediately thrown back onto his bed. His blue eyes were wide with shock as he stared up at the girl who was now straddling him. "Whoa," he said, looking up at her warily. "You're kinda strong for a chick, huh?" "I work out," she told him flirtatiously, running her hands up his chest. He frowned and tried getting up again when she forced him back down. Trunks blinked in surprise when he felt the strength in her hands, before his expression melted into the angry and intimidating glare he had inherited from Vegeta. "Listen," he told her firmly, "I really need to talk to my dad." "Oh, I'm sure he's fine," she said dismissively, scooting down lower. "Yeah, he probably is, but I still—" Trunks' voice caught in his throat. He forgot what he was saying as he closed his eyes, his worries fading from his mind as he relaxed. "Call your dad later. I want this one," Bra shouted in excitement before frowning. "No, wait, this one, Daddy, it's the most beautiful fishy in here." "Fantastic," Vegeta replied with complete indifference, continuing his shadow boxing in front of the gravity chamber without looking at his daughter. "Daddy, you didn't even look," Bra cried. "I did too, I have Super Saiyan sight," the prince retorted, not missing a beat in his lightning-fast movements. "You're lying, you don't want to see the new fishies we're gonna buy," Bra wailed in complete dismay, her voice breaking at the end. Vegeta paused, looked up at the sky, and silently asked all the greater beings why he couldn't have given Bulma another Y chromosome. And here he had once thought Trunks was hard to raise when he was a little boy. Then he had thought Trunks was difficult going through his early teenage years. But now the truth was obvious. His son had only been a warm-up for the real challenge, raising a girl. The prince sighed and turned around in complete defeat, walking over to where his daughter was sitting on the ramp to the gravity chamber. He reached down to the grass next to her and picked up his towel and water bottle. Before sitting on the grass, he wiped the sweat off his face, the back of his neck, and his chest with the towel before looking over at one of the magazines Bulma had given Bra. "All right, show me," he finally relented, tossing the towel over one shoulder. Bra smiled happily, scooting over to the edge of the ramp to be closer to her father. She practically shoved the magazine into his face, pointing at a specific yellow fish. "Look, isn't it pretty?" The little girl squealed in excitement. Vegeta examined the fish in question and his lip twitched in disgust. "Bra, that fish is not aesthetically pleasing at all." "It's not what? It's ugly," he spat out bluntly. No, it's not, Bra yelled, making him wince. The girl had inherited her mother's lungs, that was for sure. Of course it's not, I was just kidding, it's a great fish, Vegeta immediately said when he saw that his daughter was on the verge of tears. Bra sniffed a little before squeaking out. You mean it? Yes, child, Vegeta sighed. No, he didn't mean it, that was the ugliest looking fish he'd ever seen. He looked towards the compound, wondering what the hell was taking his wife so long. Goddamned woman was supposed to take their daughter shopping today to buy her a new fish tank stocked with whatever fishes the little girl wanted. But she needed to get ready first, and so he was watching their daughter. Why she needed to get ready to go fish shopping with a 5-year-old, Vegeta would never know. Females. He would never understand them, no matter how old they were. I like this one too. If we find him, I'm going to name him Nemo. Bra excitedly told him as she showed Vegeta the fish she was pointing to. Chen, do you like this one here on this page? Yes, Vegeta answered, trying his absolute best to sound interested. If we get this fish, I'm naming it Daddy Jr. His fin looks like your hair. Is that so? Vegeta growled playfully. I'll have you know, girl, that if you name any fish after me, I will have that fish for dinner. Gross, Bra said with a giggle as she flipped through the pages of her magazine. Hey kiddo, let's head out. Bulma's voice sounded out from the compound. Bra quickly got up to her feet and dashed over to the door in excitement, juggling her magazines in her arms. Vegeta watched her go before getting up himself. He picked up his water bottle and chugged it down while walking into the compound after his daughter. Bulma was closing the fridge door as he walked into the kitchen. She was wearing her shades and had her purse over one shoulder. She looked over at him when he came in and gave him a smile. Hey, you sure you don't want to come along? Vegeta frowned as he filled up his water bottle in the sink. He was actually contemplating tagging along for his own peace of mind. 3 days had come and gone without further incident, and things seemed to finally be going back to normal. He was getting more sleep, which helped a lot. He felt more rested and alert, and best of all, there were no more nightmares to deal with. They had just stopped cold, which he did think was odd, but he wasn't about to question his good luck. He was starting to think the strange events earlier in the week were really just because of his exhaustion. Still, he hadn't completely relaxed. His daughter was still sleeping with him and Bulma at night until they got the new fish tank set up in her room. He had also become hypersensitive to both of their kais, tracking them every minute they were in the compound that they weren't in his sight, and it wasn't often that neither was in his sight. Vegeta glanced over at Bulma when she came up next to him. She kissed him on the cheek. You don't have to come if you don't want to, Vegeta. The prince looked his wife over out of the corner of his eye for a few seconds before reaching for her. He put his arm around her waist and pulled her close to him, sighing as he did. Just be safe, woman, he told her quietly in her ear. I will, sweetheart, Bulma reassured him, rubbing his chest a little before leaning back enough to give him a proper kiss. He pulled her closer against him and deepened their kiss, but after a few seconds, Bulma broke it off. She gave him a quick peck on his lips before pulling away from him completely. That's enough until you take a shower, buddy. You stink, she told him playfully as she adjusted her shades. Vegeta rolled his eyes and turned back to the sink, scooping up his water bottle. Whatever, call me if you want me to bring back anything. Chen, I'll tell you what, not to bring back any hideous fish. Their daughter suddenly shouted from the living room, let's go, mommy. All right, Bulma called back out. Goodness, impatient just like her father, loud and annoying just like her mother. Vegeta chuckled when Bulma hit him in the arm, before he walked both of them out. 3 hours later, freshly showered from his training, Vegeta began prowling the kitchen for some lunch when he heard a phone ringing upstairs. The prince glanced up towards the ceiling and recognized the ringtone coming from his cell phone. He hardly ever used the thing, but he left the kitchen to go retrieve it anyways. Only Bulma and Trunks had the number, so it was worth answering. He ascended the staircase and finally entered his bedroom. It took a bit of rummaging around, but he finally found the device buried in the bottom of the closet. He looked at it and saw that it was Trunks calling. Vegeta flipped open the phone and growled out, "What the hell kind of trouble are you in now, boy?" Trunks smiled on the other end. He felt better already. No trouble, Dad, just wanted to talk to you. HN, how are you? Fine, you. I'm good, Trunks confidently said. Sitting down cross-legged on a table outside of his dorm, he rubbed the back of his neck a little as he frowned. How is school? Oh, it's all right, no sweat. No sweat, huh? Why are we seeing these shitty grades then? Trunks sighed and looked down a bit. Dad, I'm trying. Bullshit, you're trying. We talked about this before you left for that school, Trunks. You said you were taking being the next in line for your mother's business seriously. Seems to me, though, that you only left to get laid and screw around. Well, Goten might be into that shit, but I won't tolerate that from you. You're a man now, so grow the hell up and act like it. You hear me? Yeah, I hear you, Trunks mumbled, outlining an old derogatory carving on the table he was sitting on with his finger. His father was right, he hadn't really been trying. He nodded, even though his father couldn't see it. I'll bring my grades up. You better. There was a pause before Vegeta added. You better be wearing a condom. Trunks smirked a little. I do, don't worry. Good, don't impregnate any stupid girl there because I will kill you myself. The teenager chuckled. I'm not looking to be a dad anytime soon. HN coming by this weekend. Yeah, maybe tomorrow, I don't know, I got midterms coming up and I gotta start studying. Trunks started drumming his fingers on the edge of the table, scowling as he did. What's wrong, son? Nothing. Vegeta sighed. How many times do I have to tell you that you can't lie to me? Well, Trunks started, glancing around him uncomfortably to make sure no one was nearby. I've been having these bad nightmares over the last few days. There was a pause on the other end before Vegeta asked in a neutral voice, the last few days. Yeah, just giving me a bad feeling, that's all. What are they about? You're always in them, and you're always in a lot of pain. Sometimes there's tons of blood, I don't know, it's just weird. They're only in your head, harmless visions. Do something physical that doesn't involve a female. Train more, get yourself tired. They'll go away. Trunks nodded, sighing quietly as he did. All right. Good, I'm gonna go do some work, but thanks, Dad. HN, if you decide not to come this weekend, call your mother and let her know. Trunks and Vegeta both hung up at the same time. The teenager leaned forward, cradling his chin in one hand as he rested his elbow on his knee. He zoned out as he watched the students on his campus walk by. Some girls glanced his way, but he didn't notice. He felt better after talking to his father. The feeling of dread was gone. Vegeta was fine and still himself. Nothing was amiss that Trunks could see. He reached up and massaged at his temple a bit, wondering why he still felt so out of sorts. Trunks was frightened nearly half to death when someone grabbed his shoulders roughly from behind. The teenager immediately shot to his feet, spun around and raised his hand out in front of him. He then cursed under his breath as he watched Goten burst out into loud laughter. You son of a bitch, Trunks growled at him, taking a breath to steady his nerves. Oh, I got you good, Goten laughed, sitting down on the table where Trunks had been just a second ago. You were pretty deep in thought, man, I couldn't resist. HN. Trunks reached up and rubbed at his eyes a bit as Goten's smile melted into mild concern. You feeling all right? You don't look so good. Nah, I'm good, Trunks said, lowering his hand and looking at his best friend. What's up? It's Saturday, Trunks. Where are the good parties at tonight? Not tonight, man. I have to start studying for my midterms. Oh, come on, seriously, on a Saturday night, study tomorrow. Look at you, you're all wound up. You look like you could use a few drinks. Well, Trunks said, smirking a little. Maybe if I get some work done this afternoon, then I can have the night off. Beta Ihai is having a party tonight and I'm invited. They want me to pledge, so they're recruiting pretty heavy. Goten laughed. Well, let's not disappoint. They can start recruiting me too, since I already know I'll be coming here next year, though not in the honors engineering program like you, nerd. The two shared in a fist bump as Trunks' smirk spread. Hater. I can't help it that I can pull the grades when I feel like it. Yeah, rub it in, why don't ya? Anyways, you gotta introduce me to that new girl you're shacking up with. I gotta see this chick to believe that she's as good looking as you say she is. Don't worry, she'll be there tonight. Bra had her nose plastered against the glass of the new aquarium tank in her room later that day. She was smiling happily as she watched her new fish swim around. Bulma and Vegeta were both standing on opposite ends of the tank. She was making sure that the light in the tank would turn on when the bedroom light turned off, and he was making sure the tank was adequately mounted to the wall. They're all so pretty, Bra gushed in giddy excitement. They are. You did a great job picking them out, Bulma said, finally stepping over to her daughter when she was satisfied with the light. Vegeta finally pulled away as well and looked at both of them. Bulma rubbed Bra's back while she pointed to the different fish, reminding her daughter what types they were. The prince watched them for a few seconds and then turned around and walked out of the room. He went into his own bedroom, closing the door behind him. He was feeling oddly stiff and figured a hot shower would soothe his muscles. He was walking past the mirror to the shower, about to tug his t-shirt off when a shadow passed over the mirror out of the corner of his eye. Vegeta stopped and let go of his shirt. He immediately backed up and stared at the mirror. He could only see his own reflection. He frowned a bit before opening the bathroom door and poking his head out. The prince scanned over his bedroom and then looked towards the ceiling. His wife and daughter were still upstairs. The prince closed the door and then looked back at the mirror for a few seconds with intense concentration. He tilted his head when he realized there were faint scratchings on the glass. Had that been there before? Vegeta leaned in close, bringing one finger up. He gently outlined the scratches. It seemed to spell something out, but it wasn't in any Earth language. His mind rapidly tried figuring out what it meant, if anything. It looked familiar, like a language he'd seen before when he worked for Frieza, but it had been so long ago that he couldn't make any sense of it. Vegeta cursed and spun around immediately when he felt someone's hand on his shoulder. He let out a deep breath before glaring at his wife. "Don't do that, woman. You okay?" Bulma asked, looking at him in concern. She could count on one hand the amount of times she had managed to successfully sneak up on and startle Vegeta over the last 20 years. He nodded before gesturing to the mirror over his shoulder with his thumb. "You seen this?" "Seen what?" "This," Vegeta said, turning and pointing to the faint scratches. Bulma leaned in close, her blue eyes focused. She reached out like Vegeta had and gently traced them out. "Huh, weird. That wasn't there this morning when I was getting ready. Or maybe it was. They're so faint they could have been easy to miss." They both jumped with a start and Bulma shrieked when the door to their bathroom suddenly slammed shut. She immediately launched herself against Vegeta, clinging tightly to his shirt. "What the hell?" Vegeta mumbled under his breath, blinking in surprise at the door. He quickly disentangled himself from his wife and pulled at the door knob. His eyes narrowed when the door didn't open. He pulled on it again with enough strength to yank the door clean off, but it wouldn't give. Vegeta snarled with impatience and pushed Bulma aside. "Get back, Vegeta, don't!" She started to warn him, but she couldn't get a chance to say anything more before Vegeta lifted his leg and kicked the door with a brutal force. The wooden door didn't budge, but his leg did. The prince instantly collapsed, hissing through his teeth as he tightly grabbed onto his leg. "Vegeta!" Bulma yelled in alarm, kneeling down next to him. She gently touched his thigh and winced when she could feel his muscles twitching painfully under his jeans. "I'm fine," he growled, forcing himself to get up to his feet. "What the hell is going on?" Bulma asked worriedly, holding onto his arm while he gave his leg a few good shakes to rid the spasms. "I don't know," Vegeta admitted. He pushed her aside a little bit before rearing back and punching the door hard. His hand immediately started twitching as he felt the bones in his knuckles shatter to pieces. He grit his teeth but was undeterred. Feeding off his pain, Vegeta shifted over one step and brutally slammed that same fist into the wall with enough force to level a mountain, to no avail. His hand was now twitching uncontrollably as he looked up and glared at the ceiling. He shot into the air and used his left hand this time as he punched at the concrete. But all he got for his effort was another broken hand. "Vegeta, stop!" Bulma yelled at him when he descended back to the floor. "It isn't working and you're only hurting yourself." He didn't look at her as she grabbed his hands in hers, examining the damage. She very gently sandwiched his right hand between both of hers, feeling his skin burning over the shattered bones. Bulma looked up at him and saw that he was rigid with tension, with a vein visibly throbbing on his temple as he looked around. "I have to get out of here, Bulma," Vegeta said in a low voice, scanning the bathroom that was getting smaller by the second. The walls felt like they were suffocating him, and he was suddenly overwhelmed by raw claustrophobia. He hadn't felt so completely trapped in years, not since Frieza had thrown him in a small, dark cell at the bottom of his flagship when he was barely a teenager. His space pods, no problem, he knew exactly how long he would be in them, could see where they were going, could force a pit stop, and could fall into an induced sleep. That cell in Frieza's dungeons, different story. He hadn't even had enough space to take one step forward, sit down, or lay down. It had driven him to the brink of absolute madness. He had nearly destroyed his body trying to escape and then had clawed at his own skin from the suffocating isolation that stretched for weeks. The trapped boy inside him howled now for freedom. He needed to breathe, but he couldn't breathe. "Honey, it's okay," Bulma gently reassured him. Vegeta was glaring at the door, his expression well guarded. However, Bulma could feel his hands shaking, and it wasn't because of the physical pain. "Let's just think about this rationally and figure a way out." "Okay." He shook his head, his jaw clenched tightly. "If I can't pound the door down, then I'll just blast." Vegeta froze, suddenly looking up towards Bra's room. He couldn't sense anything, but he could have sworn he heard something strange coming from her room. She wasn't alone. "Shit," he cursed under his breath. His eyes flashed teal for a second, before a wave of golden light suddenly exploded around him, forcing Bulma to back up away from him. Before she could get out a word, Vegeta grabbed her by the arm and hauled her over to the shower. He ripped the shower curtain clean off with one swipe and forced her into the tub. "Vegeta, what the hell are you doing?" Bulma cried out as he forced her down. "Lay down and cover your head," he ordered harshly. He covered her with the shower curtain before even giving her a chance to respond. Bulma stubbornly yanked the shower curtain off and opened her mouth to object. Her words died when she saw Vegeta standing less than a foot away from the bathroom door. Golden flames were raging around him as he pulled his hands back. A powerful blue light sparked up between his hands, and she ducked her head down, bracing for the explosion. Right as he was about to fire, Bra opened the door. Vegeta barely managed to stop himself before he killed his own daughter, pulling his Kai back at the last possible moment. He immediately wedged his leg against the door to keep it open before taking a deep, calming breath. He closed his eyes, and after a second his Super Saiyan transformation disappeared. When Bulma peeked over to see why Vegeta hadn't fired, she scrambled out of the tub and went over to her daughter. "Baby, are you okay?" she asked Bra, kneeling down in front of her. The little girl nodded, looking back and forth between her parents in confusion. "The bad people talked to me. They said the oldest comes first and to have patience. I dunno what they meant. They scared me, so I came here." Vegeta and Bulma both stared blankly at their daughter. Finally, the prince growled before hissing to Bulma, "Watch her, I'll be back." With that, he strode out to go check the compound. Bulma let out a shaky breath, trying to ignore the chills going down her spine at her daughter's words. She gave Bra a strained smile, gently rubbing her arms. "You sure you're okay, kiddo?" Bra nodded before looking at her mother curiously. "Are you okay, mommy?" Bulma forced a smile as she nodded. "Yeah, I'm okay," she lied. "Good, cause I'm hungry. Can we have dinner now?" Bulma stood up and took her daughter's hand. "How about we go out to a restaurant for dinner tonight?" "Yeah," Bra yelled happily, forgetting all about the strange people she had been talking to prior to coming to her parents' room. "Okay, come on, let's go downstairs and get into the hover jet." "What about Daddy?" "Daddy will meet us downstairs, sweetie," Bulma gently said, even though she was almost hauling Bra with her. She knew Vegeta could hear them and would be there as she said. Right now, though, she needed to get out of there for a few hours and think logically about what the hell had just happened. A minute later, Bulma was drumming her fingers along the dashboard of her hover jet, which was running on idle. Bra was already fastened and secured behind her, and was entertaining herself by playing games on one of Trunks' old iPods. Bulma glanced over at her home while she waited for her husband. Vegeta opened the door a couple of minutes later and sat down in the passenger seat. He and Bulma exchanged a look, and he gave a subtle shake of his head, silently telling her he didn't find or smell anyone. "Daddy, did you find the bad people?" Vegeta glared at his daughter through the mirror. "That is enough about that girl. I won't hear anything more about any bad people, do you understand me?" he demanded harshly. Bra pouted a little before nodding. It was very rare that Vegeta spoke to her with that tone, but she knew that it meant that the topic of conversation was officially over. She looked out the window towards her home, her eyes settling on her bedroom window as Bulma started up the hover jet. Bulma massaged the back of Vegeta's neck soothingly to calm him down. His jaw was clenched almost painfully tight as he stared straight ahead. She let him go as the hover jet levitated into the air. "All right, guys. How about we go check out that new fast food place that just opened on Red River downtown? I hear they have killer shakes and a place where kids can play, Bulma said brightly, making subtle eye contact with her husband. He nodded, knowing that what she wanted was to talk to him alone. Bulma looked over at her daughter and smiled. What do you think? A burger and an Oreo shake. Sound good, baby? Yeah, Bra said quietly, smiling a little. That did sound good. The little girl looked back at the compound, deep down wondering if she could keep sleeping with her parents even though they had set up her new fish tank. Bulma set the coordinates, and the hover jet picked up speed before leaving the premises. But not before Bra waved back at the silhouette in her bedroom window that was waving goodbye to her. What about Trunks? Bulma asked quietly as she bandaged Vegeta's damaged hands. They both kept sneaking glances at their daughter as she played with the other kids. They were off to the side, away from all of the other parents as they sat at their own little table within eyesight of the play area. They both had 2 shakes in front of them, but they were untouched as they conversed in hushed tones. Talked to him earlier. He's fine. In addition, he can take care of himself. Something's not right, Vegeta. Might just be a joke. Goten and Trunks might be trying to be cute little shitheads. Wouldn't you be able to smell them or sense them, though? Chen. Vegeta narrowed his eyes a little as he watched Bulma gently bandage his hands. His right hand was twitching badly. He briefly glanced over at Bra before looking back at his wife. What do you think? I think maybe we should think about leaving home for a while until we figure out what the hell is going on. I won't run away, he spat out tersely. Vegeta, Bulma sighed. You couldn't break through that door today. Don't you think that's weird and extremely dangerous? What if something had happened to Bra? He glared at her. I was going to blast the door down when the girl opened it. All right, what do you think we should do then? I think we stay. There must be a logical explanation for what happened. Bulma hesitated before venturing. Do you think what Bra said might be true? Vegeta almost snarled in disgust. Woman, you have got to be joking. Imaginary people, the constructs of a child's mind playing on her fears. Are we seriously going to entertain such foolishness? I don't know, Bulma said in exasperation. It's just I'm trying to think about this logically, but it's not making any sense to me. Vegeta sighed deeply through his nose as she finished up with his hands. He pulled them back and couldn't make a fist with his left hand. He couldn't move any fingers at all on his right hand. The prince scowled as he glared down at his hands before shaking his head. Must be someone without any Kai signature somehow getting access. Rigged the walls to somehow withstand my strength while I was training and you were at work and the children were at school. That's the only logical explanation. Like an android, Bulma asked worriedly. Yes, something like that. We'll stay and put in motion detectors. They have to be highly calibrated for elite speed. Increase security inside the house. If someone is getting in, I will get them, he vowed. Fine, Bulma sighed. We'll try it your way, but Bra sleeps with us until things go back to normal, and one of us is always with her. Fine, he agreed. He looked down and awkwardly pulled his shake close to him with his wrists before glancing back up at his wife. She was watching their daughter playing, biting at her lips. Vegeta sighed and scooted his chair around the small circled table so he was sitting next to her instead of across from her. Bulma turned her head a little towards him when he leaned in and whispered in her ear, Everything will be fine, woman. I am here and I won't let anything happen to either of you. We'll figure this out. Bulma smiled a little before pulling back and kissing his cheek. I know, she said confidently. She reached over and brought him his shake, pulling hers close as well. They both watched their daughter play, each of them expressing outward confidence they didn't fully feel inside. That girl is checking you out, kid. Oh yeah. Trunks asked loudly with a smirk, looking over his shoulder. The frat party was fully underway and it had a blacklight theme. He had worn a white t-shirt and it had already been branded all over by a slew of different girls and Goten, who wrote nerd across Trunks' back. Sure enough, there was a girl across the darkened part who was ravaging him with her eyes. Trunks flashed her a confident and predatory grin before turning and lifting his beer for another drink. You might be right, Max. Hell yeah, see what I mean? You'd be right at home here. The tall senior boy told Trunks loudly over the blasting music, clapping him on the back. He put his arm around Trunks' shoulders and put his other around Goten's. I like both of you. You both got spunk and you're decent students. Well, at least you are, he told Trunks specifically before laughing at Goten's indignant expression. I'm decent, Goten yelled out. I got into this place, didn't I? Yeah, but you ain't got the brief's brain, kid. More than a little buzzed, Trunks laughed out loud. Hey man, I can pass my classes, but I'm not my mom. You're acting like your mom's here though. Another boy informed him as he approached. What's up? Max, you get these kids to pledge yet? Nah. Not yet, Max said with a grin before gesturing to Goten. This one here's just a senior in high school, he's a baby. Hey you, your name's Trunks, right? Trunks Briefs. That's me, Trunks said, carefully eyeing the newcomer over. You're Dow, right? Vice Prez. In the flesh, the short and lanky junior said, patting Trunks on the back. What about you, kid? Why aren't you going after that girl? She's been having sex with you all night with her eyes. And you're just sitting over here like you're scared. Man, I'm not scared, Trunks scoffed. I already have a girl. Bunch of lies. Goten cut in. You only talk about her, but I haven't ever seen her. She'll be here, relax, Trunks told him, lifting his beer for another chug. What's her name? Max asked, turning around and scouring the party over. It was packed and dark with flashing lights, but he could pick out any decent-looking girl in record time. Maybe I already know her. Her name's Keegan X How. And she's a fucking 15 out of 10 on the hotness scale, let me tell you, Trunks laughed. Max and Dow exchanged a startled look before they both turned to look at Trunks. Her name is what? Dow asked, his eyes widening. Something about his tone made Trunks and Goten both look at each other. They both looked over at the boys with them. Trunks' eyes narrowed before he said again, her name's Keegan X How. She's a freshman going into engineering like me. Dude, you are really drunk, aren't you? Max asked, patting Trunks on the shoulder as he examined him with a hint of concern. If anything happened to one of the underage kids at his party, the school would have his head. No, I'm not, Trunks shot back, a hint of anger in his voice now. Okay, so he was a little drunk, but he still had his wits about him and he knew something was wrong here. What the hell's the problem with you guys? He demanded. Max and Dow exchanged another look before Dow looked back at Trunks. He studied him a bit before carefully saying, Keegan X How was a freshman here. She died about 20 years ago. Man, get the fuck out of here, Trunks snorted, waving his hand in dismissal as he looked away. I was just with her this morning. Maybe it's another chick with the same name, Goten suggested with a shrug. Must be, Max said with a shrug. Girl got really sick and died right in her dorm room. Freakiest thing. Healthy one day, dead the next. Poor girl. Well, obviously there must be another freshman with the same name. Trunks argued, a little hot now with agitation over the topic. Sensing the hostility coming from the teenager, the two older boys patted him on the shoulder. Hey, relax, kid, so long as you're getting laid, then what does it matter? Trunks nodded, but his smiles and laughter were forced for the next 15 or so minutes. He subtly pushed his beer away and stopped drinking, suddenly fighting severe nausea. The upperclassmen eventually left them to go try to recruit other freshmen when Goten came up and sat down close to Trunks. Hey man, you alright? Goten asked him quietly, examining his friend in concern as Trunks ran one hand through his now sweaty hair. You want to get out of here? Yeah, Trunks nodded after a second. I don't feel so hot, he added, rubbing at his eyes. All right. The two teenagers snuck out of the party. Goten walked with his best friend up to his dorm room and hesitated at the door when Trunks walked in. He buried his hands in his pockets and said, I'm sorry she didn't show, Trunks. Don't worry about it, I'm sure I'll see her around. You'll meet her another time, Trunks said, sitting down heavily on his bed. Goten nodded and went to walk away when he looked back at his friend. You sure you're okay? Goten asked again, frowning a little bit. I can call my dad and have him you back home in 2 seconds. No, Trunks said firmly, shaking his head. No, I'm good, Goten. Just need to get some sleep is all. All right, take it easy then, text me later. Yeah, will do, thanks man, no prob. Goten left and closed the door behind him. Trunks sat in silence, waiting until he could sense his friend leaving the dorm. The teenager sat there trying to ignore the feeling of dread spreading through him. It was just coincidence, that was all. Hell, maybe they were just screwing with him. A second later, and Trunks shot into the chair at his desk. He opened up his laptop and fired it up from idle. He quickly pulled up the site where he could access the student listing, punched in the girl's name and hit enter. No results. Oh shit, Trunks mumbled bleakly, reaching up to wipe the sweat off his brow. He took a deep breath and pulled up a web search, typed in the name and hit enter. He would have fallen to his knees if he hadn't been sitting. His hands were shaking as he saw the image staring back at him, the same girl he had been bringing to his bed over the last few days. The headlines all loaded up in lightning speed. Youth dies in her sleep. Autopsy for young engineering student inconclusive. Strange viral disease claims young girl's life at West City College. Oh shit, Trunks said again, shaking now as he stood up. He somehow managed to stumble out of his room and into the sweet bathroom that he shared with 7 other freshman boys. Without bothering with the light, he burst into a stall, dropped to his knees, and vomited until he thought he was going to pass out. Finally, 5 minutes later, Trunks slowly pulled himself up. He weakly trudged over to the sink with incredible effort, turning the cold water up all the way, not even bothering to splash the water on his face. Trunks just lowered his head in the sink. His head was right under the full stream of water, which was hitting him right on the temple, soothing the burning sensation while he panted for air. Hallucinating, he must have been hallucinating. Was the entire thing in his head? Hadn't he touched her? He tried to draw up the memories of the physical contact. He was drawing an alarming blank. He couldn't remember the things he should have. What did she smell like, feel like, sound like this morning in his bed? She pushed him down. Argued with him, then nothing. It was like he blacked out, and the other night, they had gone out for a bite to eat, but he had no recollection of the details, where they had gone, what he had ordered, what she had worn, nothing. Trunks squeezed his eyes shut and tried to remember, but he couldn't think of anything except her face and her name. After a minute of agonizing over things he thought had happened, he turned the water off. His head was hurting with a vengeance. He swallowed heavily and then raised his head to look himself in the mirror. In the mirror, though, he saw almost 20 silhouettes standing behind him with red eyes. Trunks immediately spun around and faced them. He tried raising his kai to power up, but he didn't have the strength. He collapsed, falling sitting down, his eyes wide with fear. The shadows suddenly advanced on him and Trunks screamed, "You're such an idiot. I didn't know that this was going to happen. They're going to blame us for this, saying it was our fault because we gave the underage kid alcohol. Don't you know who his mom is? Bulma Briefs will buy this fucking school just to have us both expelled. And have you seen those pictures the media got of his dad at the last World Martial Arts tournament? If we don't get expelled, then that guy is going to kill us. Shit, Max, what were you thinking inviting Trunks Briefs to the party?" Dao hissed furiously, pacing back and forth in his friend's dorm room later that night. Max was sitting on his bed, his red face in his hands. "The kid was fine when we left him," Max argued weakly, his voice muffled by his hands. "I had no idea. This is fucked up, man," Dao sighed, shaking his head in dismay as he continued his relentless pacing. He removed his glasses and rubbed one eye. His parents probably know what happened by now, and if they don't, they will soon. This is so fucked up. They both fell into a miserable silence. Dao put his glasses on and looked out of his friend's window, watching the freshman dorm across the soccer field. The flashing ambulance and police lights were reflecting back on him, washing anxiety over him. "We need to go visit him as soon as we know where they're taking him. Make sure that he'll be all right. Show that we care and tell him how sorry we are that this happened to him. Hopefully his parents will be less inclined to nail our balls to the wall if we do that." "No way, man," Max said, shaking his head adamantly. "I don't want anything more to do with Trunks Briefs. He's seeing visions of the ex-how chick and then this weird shit happens to him. TCH, fuck that, I don't care what you say, that is not coincidence." Dao groaned and looked up towards the ceiling as he closed his eyes. "Max, you can't be serious. Dude, listen to these posts going up on Facebook." Max insisted, pulling out his cell phone with shaking hands. He quickly pulled up the website. "Here's Lynn. She lives in the same dorm as Trunks. Listen to her post, just heard a kid downstairs screaming like he was being mauled by a pack of wolves while the floors shook like there was an earthquake. Now the power's down and we're on lockdown. I knew I should have gone out of state when I heard the ghost stories." Dao rolled his eyes. "That girl doesn't know what 2 plus 2 is. Here's Mike's post, stopped by WCC convenience at the Frosh dorm when the floors shook. Lights went out. And a kid screamed like he was being murdered. Now I'm stuck here on lockdown and there are police and ambulances. Fucking awesome. Mike was drunk off his ass when he left tonight. He clearly still is. Here's Frank's post. Max, stop it." Dao cried out in exasperation, running one hand up through his spiked hair. "Trunks was drunk, that's why we're screwed, because an underage freshman was at our party. probably picked a fight with the wrong people and now might not live through the night. It has nothing to do with some made-up folk story about a girl who died 20 years ago. Get your head straight because we have to go see this kid to make sure he's alright. Max tossed his phone onto his bed before wiping his sweaty hands on his jeans. There was an anxious jiggling to his knee as he mumbled, "Dow, what went down in that dorm tonight is not normal. Seriously, I don't want to go see him. You go by yourself." "The hell I will," Dow yelled. Marching right up to his friend, he practically shoved a finger in Max's face as he continued, "You invited Trunks Briefs to the party tonight, so you aren't getting out of this. If I have to go face his parents and try to make the peace, then you damn well are coming with me to do it." Max looked away, staring off at the wall. Finally, after a few seconds, he wiped his hands on his jeans again and then nodded. "All right," Max quietly relented. "Good. Now let's go talk to the Emps before they take off so we can find out where they are taking him." Max nodded. He stood up and followed Dow out of his room, silently saying a prayer for the first time in years that everything would turn out all right. Trust. It was something that Vegeta still struggled with fundamentally, even after all this time. He trusted the Earth Warriors, yes, but only in battle. On a deeper level, though, he only trusted his wife and his children. That was it, or at least he thought that was it. Turned out he was wrong. Vegeta frowned and gently brushed his daughter's hair out of her face with his fingertips, the only parts of his hands that weren't bandaged. The little girl was sound asleep in his bed, in her usual shorts and one of her brother's sweaters. The prince sighed quietly to himself at the sight of Trunks' sweater, his stomach clenching with anxiety. He glanced up towards the ceiling when he felt Bulma start to leave their daughter's room. He then gathered his daughter up in his arms as best he could with his wounded hands and lifted her up from the bed. Bra stirred in his arms, peeking up at him. "Where are we going?" she whispered tiredly. "Hush, sleep, princess," he whispered back, cradling her gently as he turned to leave the room. Bra snuggled into his chest instinctively, and was asleep again before he even reached the door. Bulma met him down the hall a moment later, carrying her daughter's pink book bag, which was stuffed with clothes and toys. She checked the little girl in her husband's arms, before pulling out her cell phone and punching in a speed dial number. 20 seconds later, Goku appeared out of nowhere in front of them. His appearance showed that it was past 3 in the morning, more than any clock ever could. He was in his boxers, his hair was a complete disaster, and his eyes were still bleary from sleep. It was obvious that Chi-Chi had literally just woken him up, and he had immediately transported over. His eyes quickly focused when he took a good look at his friends. Bulma's hair was tied up in a messy ponytail, and she was still wearing the oversized shirt she had been trying to sleep in, having just thrown on some jeans to go with it. Vegeta's left eye was twitching rhythmically with his stress, and the bandages on his hands made it look like he had pounded glass for hours. They both looked completely exhausted. "I'm so sorry to wake you, Goku," Bulma whispered. "But we have to leave right away and we can't take her with us." "It's all right, Bulma, how is he?" Goku whispered in concern, taking the pink book bag from Bulma and slinging it over his shoulder. "We don't know, we just got the call a couple minutes ago," Bulma answered, unable to keep her worry out of her voice. Goku nodded and then turned to Vegeta. He took a step towards him, already opening his arms to take the little girl from him. Vegeta scowled. Looking down at his daughter, he didn't want to let her go, but he had no choice. They had to go see Trunks immediately, and it was not a good idea to bring the little girl along when they had no idea what kind of condition their son was in. In the moment of crisis, it dawned on the prince that he had been wrong indeed, for there was one other that he trusted absolutely and completely beyond the battlefield. He was the only man in existence who Vegeta could leave his daughter with and feel assured that she would be safe. He was the man standing in front of him now. Without a threat or warning, the prince stepped forward and handed Bra over to Goku, who took her gently into his arms. Bra stirred but didn't rouse during the transfer. Vegeta sighed as he looked at her before his eyes shifted up to meet Goku's. "Don't worry, Vegeta, she'll be safe with me," Goku assured the man he now considered a close friend. Vegeta stared at him for a few seconds, and then turned around and walked away without a word. Goku sighed before looking at Bulma. "If you guys want, I can drop off Bra at home, come back here, take you guys to Trunks and then go back home. It would only take a few seconds, or if it makes you feel better, I could take you guys right now so Bra's with us the whole time. Thanks for the suggestion, but I'm gonna have to say no." One teleportation is more than enough for her. And I don't want you to leave her, Bulma said tiredly, looking at her little girl. Don't worry about me and Vegeta. We'll make it there fast, I guarantee you. They both looked over when Vegeta approached them again. He was holding Bra's stuffed bear in his left hand, barely able to grasp onto it. He gently tucked it into his daughter's sleeping arms. If she wakes up, she won't go back to sleep without this stupid thing, Vegeta quietly said before taking a step back. Goku nodded as Bulma came to stand next to her husband. She grabbed onto his arm for support, though she wasn't sure if that support was more for him or for her. We'll come get her as soon as we can. Thank you so much for doing this for us, Goku, Bulma told him genuinely. Vegeta nodded, silently echoing her words. It's not a problem, let me know how he is. They both nodded to him. Goku gently shifted Bra as best he could so he was holding her with one arm. He then put 2 fingers to his forehead and they were gone. Bulma and Vegeta both immediately headed downstairs without a word. Half a minute later and they were already in the air in Bulma's hover jet. Vegeta looked out the side window at the dark night, focusing on his son's Kai signature as he had been doing since his wife got the call. It was weak, but it was steady. That was the only reason they were even remotely calm. The fact that their daughter had been sound asleep had also curbed any potential panicking, mostly on the part of Bulma. We'll be there in a few minutes, Bulma informed him. She glanced at him worriedly. You can still sense him, right? Yes, he automatically responded, keeping his eyes out the window. He hasn't changed conditions since the phone call. You didn't feel anything earlier, someone with a high power that you didn't recognize or something? No, Vegeta said, scowling at the window. They fell into a worried and tense silence before Bulma finally said in a quiet voice, this is what Bra meant. Her husband looked back at her. What? She said, the oldest comes first, right? That's Trunks. Vegeta, what if someone is targeting the kids? He sighed, shook his head and looked back out the window. Woman, we don't know all the details of what happened to Trunks tonight. Let's find that out first before you jump to wild conspiracy theories. Bulma sighed but didn't say anything else. She would wait and see. She had to wait longer than she cared to. They arrived at the hospital where Trunks had been taken to, only to find that they had to wait to see him. A well-delivered threat from Vegeta had the staff assuring the couple that they would see their son as soon as possible. The Saiyan relented only because he was able to sense his son. He sat down on one of the chairs in the waiting area for patients in the ER and crossed his arms. He joined the others who were also waiting and staring at the television playing an old game show, without actually watching it. Bulma joined him after she filled out some paperwork, and then the waiting game began. After 30 minutes, Vegeta angrily hissed under his breath, "This is absurd, what the hell are they doing to him? They're taking care of him, we'll see him as soon as we can," Bulma whispered to him. "Chen, excuse me, are you two the parents of Trunks' briefs?" A rough voice asked from behind them. Bulma and Vegeta both looked over their shoulders to see a slightly overweight, middle-aged police officer standing there. They stood up and Bulma extended her hand to him while Vegeta remained close behind her. "Yes, I'm Bulma Briefs and this is my husband Vegeta," she said as he took her hand and shook it. "I'm Officer McStalin. I'm sorry to meet you both under these circumstances and I promise I won't take up too much of your time. I just have some questions I need to ask about your son." "That's fine." Vegeta followed his wife as they went to stand somewhere with the officer where they could be alone. His eyes were narrowed as he listened to the known events that happened that night. Trunks had gone to a frat party that night and had drinks. They assumed the alcohol made him vomit in the bathroom. What happened afterwards, they could only assume was some kind of assault in that same bathroom. The power went out in the entire building, and students have said they felt the floors shaking. It seems set up and predetermined, like someone generated a distraction during the assault. Is there anyone Trunks was having problems with at school who you think might have something to do with this? No, Bulma said, shaking her head. Trunks hasn't even been there 2 months, he's just a freshman and he's still making friends. I see, the officer said, taking notes. And what about you two? He asked, looking up and examining them both. Vegeta's respect increased a notch when the officer made eye contact with him without any kind of fear. Is there anyone who would be targeting either of you through your son? Bulma shifted uncomfortably under the question. She had been wondering the same thing and she had no answer. Upon seeing her hesitation, Vegeta stepped up a little. There is no one targeting any of us, Vegeta growled angrily. Furthermore, even if there was someone with a vendetta, there are few who are strong enough to hurt our son. The officer nodded, taking more notes. All right, we'll continue looking into what might have happened tonight. We don't want this to happen to any other students. Here is my direct number, he said, handing Bulma a card. Please let me know if either of you think someone might be behind this. Also, as soon as your son feels up to it, we'd like to ask him a few questions as well. Thank you, Bulma said. Looking at the card, the officer nodded to them and walked away while Vegeta snorted in disgust. Trunks assaulted, he scoffed, rolling his eyes. Give me a fucking break. Bulma sighed. I don't know, Vegeta, she started, clearly unconvinced. There is no one strong enough to hurt the boy. It sounds to me like he might have had problems controlling his power, Vegeta reasoned. That's likely the reason for the power outage and the floors shaking, rather than some human getting the best of him. Since when does Trunks have problems controlling his power? Bulma asked, looking up from the card to make eye contact with her husband. It was a good question. He had no answer for that. He looked away with a frown, trying to think about the situation logically. But he was running out of ground to stand on. Before he could get out a word, a short doctor with gray hair approached them. Mrs. Briefs. Yes, Bulma said, turning around to face the newcomer. My name is Dr. Beeson. I'm the attending physician responsible for your son. How is he? The boy suffered a severe anxiety attack. The EMTs had to give him a strong sedative so we could treat him. We've run several tests to rule out certain conditions, especially for the new disease code V, but things are coming back fine. It seemed to be a response to the assault he went through tonight. He will make a full recovery and should be released soon, either tomorrow or the day after at the very latest. So it was an assault? Bulma asked worriedly as Vegeta turned around to give them both his back. By the nature of his injuries, yes. Where is he? Vegeta suddenly cut in. He's recovering in room 310B. He had barely finished giving them the room number when Bulma and Vegeta were both gone in that direction. Their urgency came to a sudden stop, though, when they finally reached Trunks' room, both of them gazing at their son. Bulma paused for a second before rushing over to him. Vegeta, though, remained frozen in the doorway. His brain briefly stopped working at the sight of his son. Trunks was unnaturally pale and out cold, his hair still damp with sweat and sticking out in crazy directions. There was visible bruising forming on his neck and in splotches on his chest where it looked like he had been struck hard. The prince wiped his brow with the back of his forearm before slowly making his way over towards the bed. Bulma was gently running her hand through Trunks' hair as Vegeta came to stand on the other side of their son. The prince's teeth were grinding together as his eyes swept over his son's battered form. He leaned down and examined the bruises on his neck further. Trunks' skin was raw and the bruises were shaped roughly like thin fingers. Fingers from a hand that had clearly wrapped tightly around his throat. Bulma didn't have to say anything to him because there was no longer any doubt. Someone had gotten to his son and done this to him. Vegeta could hardly wrap his mind around the thought that there was someone out there who could be so powerful that he didn't already know about, but there was no longer any other explanation. Vegeta's eyes were furious as he struggled to keep himself in check. He could feel his Kai start to surge against his will in response to his growing rage. When he found out who was responsible for doing this to his son, heaven help them, what the hell? Bulma quietly asked out loud, bringing Vegeta out of his murderous thoughts. Vegeta, come look at this. Look at what? He asked, coming around the bed to stand next to his wife. He leaned in close while Bulma gently turned Trunks' head away from them so they could see the side of his neck clearer. Vegeta blinked in surprise at the mark on his son's neck. Someone had literally burned some kind of strange design right into his skin. The burn was covered with a gel-like substance to help it heal, but the mark was clearly visible. What the fuck? Vegeta whispered. Do you recognize this? Bulma asked, her blue eyes filled with tears at the thought that someone had done such a thing to her son. It looks familiar, he admitted, scowling at the marking. He struggled to recognize it, but after a few seconds he shook his head in frustration. I can't place it. Vegeta very gently outlined the markings, his fingertips barely grazing Trunks' skin, when the teenager jerked in response to the contact. The steady beeping that had been monitoring his heartbeat suddenly skyrocketed as Trunks sat straight up, gasping for air and looking around in an incoherent but complete panic. It's all right. Bulma and Vegeta both said at the same time. Trunks flashed his parents a bewildered look as though he couldn't recognize them. He was breathing heavily as he looked around the rest of the room, slowly starting to realize that he was in the hospital. "It's okay, sweetie," Bulma told him soothingly, rubbing his back and looking at her son in concern. The teenager was shaking. "You're okay now." Trunks gazed around the dimly lit room before turning back to his parents. His eyes slowly started to focus as he looked at his mother before they shifted to his father, who was watching him carefully. Trunks sighed in relief. Though he was still out of sorts from the sedation, he knew that Vegeta's strong presence meant that he was safe. Gradually, his shaking started to stop. He closed his eyes, his panic slowly going away. Bulma sat on the edge of his bed, continuing to rub his back. "What the hell happened tonight, Trunks?" Vegeta demanded. Trunks stayed silent as Bulma reached up and brushed some sweaty hair out of his face. Normally, he would have been completely opposed to his mother fussing over him. But right now, it was only Vegeta's presence that was keeping him from desperately grabbing onto Bulma and not letting her go. To hell with his bravado. He was genuinely scared to a degree he hadn't felt in his entire life. He welcomed his mother's contact as he tried working through his thoughts, which were fuzzy and disjointed. It was difficult. Trunks frowned before speaking in an extremely hoarse voice. His voice cracked before he started coughing roughly. Bulma looked around the room before looking at Vegeta and pointing to a pitcher of cold water. The prince nodded. He went over and poured out some of the water in a plastic cup, forcing his hands to cooperate as he put a straw in. He brought it back to his son and awkwardly held the cup and straw while Trunks greedily drank down the water to soothe the dryness of his throat. Vegeta pulled the cup back when Trunks was finished. "Well, what happened?" he demanded again. Trunks looked up at his father through hazy eyes. His voice was only slightly better as he started rambling. "They were shadows or ghosts, spirits. I don't know, but I couldn't fight them, Dad. They surrounded me. Then there was the girl. It was real. She was real. I know she was. I'm not crazy. I saw them. They had weird red eyes. They wanted to kill me. They were going to kill me, all right, take it easy." Bulma cut in when she saw the machine begin to accelerate with his heartbeat during his ranting. When Trunks turned to look at her, she leaned forward and kissed him on the forehead. "We'll talk about it in the morning." "Okay, for now, just lay down and go back to sleep." "I'm not crazy, Mom," Trunks insisted. "No one is saying that you're crazy, sweetie. You've just had a hell of a night and now you need rest." The teenager frowned and appeared to consider her words before looking back at his father. "You guys are staying, right?" Vegeta was zoned out, scowling and looking off to the side at some of the medical equipment. "Red eyes, Dad." The prince snapped out of it and looked back at his son. He hadn't seen the boy look at him in such a manner since he was little and practically begging him to check under his bed for monsters he was certain he'd seen. Vegeta did the same thing now that he'd done, then give in, just so his son could rest easily. Though this time around he didn't fight it nearly as much. "Yes, son," Vegeta said, giving a curt nod. "We will be here now, rest." Appearing satisfied with that answer, Trunks slowly laid back down, wincing as he did. He shifted closer to his mother as she rubbed the top of his head. "They said they'd be back," he mumbled, closing his eyes. "They'll be back. Shh, just sleep," Bulma whispered to him. Trunks was out again in seconds and Vegeta looked away as soon as he was. The prince looked out the window in the room, which overlooked the hospital outdoor parking lot and some residential homes beyond that. His son's explanation only left him more confused than ever. The hairs on the back of his neck were standing up as he pictured the images from his nightmares. The slaughtered children with the haunting red eyes. Could it be possible? Vegeta abruptly shook his head. That was a long time ago and they were all dead. He had made sure of it. He had brutally massacred everyone on that planet and then blown it up to pieces just for good measure. No, it couldn't be some survivor coming back for revenge. He methodically sorted through the facts. The boy had been drinking. He'd been suffering from nightmares, therefore not sleeping well. Clearly, his strange explanation was the result of his incoherent state. In the morning, they would discuss the events again with reason and logic. Vegeta. The prince looked over his shoulder at his wife, who was now standing behind him. "What do you think?" "I think the boy was out of it," he answered, looking forward again. Someone did this to him, probably taking advantage of the fact that he was inebriated. I will talk to him when he's more coherent, and then I plan on personally making sure that whoever did this to him pays for it. He paused for a moment before adding, unless Trunks wants to do that himself. Like their children, Bulma also drew reassurance and strength from Vegeta's presence. She needed to feel that now because there was a knot of fear clenching in her stomach. She leaned up against her husband, hugging him from behind. He didn't respond to the contact, nor did he pull away as he continued staring out the window. What Trunks described, Bulma whispered in his ear. It's like what I saw in the TV a few days ago. Vegeta frowned, his eyes shifting to the barely visible reflection of his wife in the glass. What are you talking about, woman? He demanded. Remember, when I bought you the sleeping medication, I saw someone in the reflection of the TV. Vegeta cocked his head to one side. That day had been a blur of sleep. It took him a moment before he finally remembered what she was talking about. What of it? It was just like Trunks described, a shadow with red eyes. The prince scowled and looked back down through the glass at the hospital parking lot. He said nothing in response, and so Bulma pressed on, worry in her voice. I didn't tell him anything about it. There's no way he could have known. When her husband's silence stretched on for almost a whole minute, she quietly spoke up again. Vegeta. His voice was almost mechanical as he responded. It's almost 4 in the morning, Bulma. Get some rest. We will talk about this more later. I guess. Everything will be fine, he confidently affirmed. He raised his right hand and in a light caress he barely trailed his fingertips over her hands which were still on his chest. We will figure this out in the morning when the boy is more awake. Bulma nuzzled her face into the nape of his neck for several seconds before sighing against his skin. All right, she relented, finally withdrawing from him. Vegeta watched out of the corner of his eye as she took a seat in an old recliner in the room close to Trunks. He crossed his arms and glared back out the window. Bulma eventually fell asleep, and the sun eventually began to rise, but Vegeta hadn't moved an inch, not feeling the least bit tired. He didn't know what the hell was going on, but he was going to find out and put a stop to it. If someone wanted his attention, they now had it. Meanwhile, down by Mount Paozu, Bra was wide awake and clutching her bear tightly to her. She was wrapped up in a warm comforter, and Chi-Chi was only a couple feet away from her in bed, sound asleep. On the floor next to the bed, Goku was sprawled out on an air mattress in a mess of bed sheets, snoring away. It was dark in the bedroom, but Bra was staring at the third being in the room, which she could see clearly in the darkness. My daddy wouldn't do that, Bra whispered very quietly so as not to wake the adults as she clutched her bear tighter. Of course he would, he's evil. Nuh-uh, Bra whispered with a frown, he's a good daddy. Your father is bad, he will die last so he learns. Bra whimpered and buried into her blankets. He's strong, he won't die, she meekly said, her eyes filling with tears at the mere idea of anything happening to her father. We're stronger, not stronger than him. You want to see what your father is truly like? I know what my daddy's like. Did you know that he is a murderer? He did shoot a bird down once, she relented, frowning in disapproval at the memory. Don't worry, we'll show you the truth soon, Bra. Goku mumbled tiredly, finally stirred out of his slumber. He slowly sat up and squinted over at the little girl on the bed. Bra was shaking and fighting back tears as she clutched her bear for dear life. What's the matter? He asked. Nothing, Bra squeaked out. Who were you talking to? No one, the little girl answered quietly. Well, all right, Goku gently conceded before yawning. Try to get some sleep, okay? Bra nodded as the Saiyan laid back down. She pulled up her bear close and closed her eyes, willing her tears not to spill over. Goku was strong just like Vegeta. He had assured her the first time she woke up that night that he would look out for her and that her parents would pick her up soon. She replayed that assurance in her mind for a long time. It wasn't until the sun was rising that she managed to fall asleep again. A few hours later, though, she woke up with a blood-curdling scream. Why the hell do I have to be the one to carry these? Max almost whined the next morning, juggling a huge bouquet of get-well roses. Do you want to do the talking? Dao hissed at him. Max shook his head. Yeah, that's what I thought. Now just carry the flowers and shut the fuck up while I handle this. The boys tried maneuvering around a slew of media folks and paparazzi who were trying to get the scoop on what had happened the night before. Bulma was at the front of them and was trying to get the point across that Trunks was fine and that the family wanted privacy during this time. Still, the pictures were being taken and the message wasn't being received. Suddenly, out of nowhere, all of the cameras and camcorders exploded. Immediately afterwards, an angry man with flame-style hair stepped up next to Bulma and viciously snarled, "All of you will leave this hospital and leave my family in peace. Now," he screamed at them. Everyone instantly scattered like rodents. Vegeta passed an ice-cold glare to the two boys who remained, one carrying a bouquet of roses. The boys were completely pale as they stared at him in terror. The prince then looked at his wife, who touched his arm and said something quietly to him. He nodded and they walked back inside together. "Yeah," Max said, nodding. "Yeah, you can definitely handle this one, man." Dao looked at him bleakly. Max motioned with his head to go after Vegeta. "Come on, let's go." "Yeah, all right," Dao said quietly. Both boys then headed inside, eager to get this over with. They got the right room number from the receptionist and then quietly went up the elevator to go see how Trunks was and hopefully get on the good side of his parents. Dao knocked lightly on the door. Vegeta opened it, and both boys took a step back away from him. The man before them was completely intimidating, and Dao briefly lost his resolve. "Who the hell are you two?" Vegeta demanded. Dao cleared his throat before forcing himself to say, "Sir, my name is Dao Chiang. I'm a junior at WCC and VP of Beta Ehi. This is my friend Max Anderson, and he's a senior and president of Beta Ehi. We know Trunks and came to visit to make sure he's all right." Vegeta stared at the boy in front of him. His eyes narrowed and then shifted to the taller, blonde boy behind him who was carrying the flowers. That one looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there and avoided eye contact with him. The prince studied him for a moment before looking back at the boy in front of him. "What the hell is Beta Ehi?" Dao shifted uncomfortably before quietly saying, "It's a fraternity, so you're the fucks that got my son drunk." Vegeta snarled angrily. "Sir," Dao meekly said while Max tried raising his roses high enough to hide behind them, "we admittedly invited your son to a party we had last night. We were interested in recruiting Trunks to join us. Our fraternity only admits the best students, and we have the highest overall GPA of all the frats on campus. We take our work seriously, and we never intended for anything to happen to your son. Save your prepared speech for someone who gives a shit." Vegeta hissed. "I will have a good discussion with my son, and then decide what to do about such a prestigious fraternity that gets underage students drunk." The two boys could do nothing but nod. The prince looked over at Max and ordered, "Bring the flowers inside. My wife will appreciate the gesture." The Saiyan stepped aside and let Max enter, but when Dao tried coming in, he extended his arm out and stopped him. "I didn't give you permission, boy. Wait here," Vegeta said. Before disappearing into the room behind Max, Dao took a few steps back and crossed his arms, anxiously watching the door. He hoped his friend would come out of this one alive. "Hi, ma'am," Max said politely, reaching out to shake Bulma's hand. "My name is Max. I know Trunks from school. I brought these for him." "Oh, that's so nice of you," Bulma said with a tired smile, taking the roses into her hands. "It is a bit dreary in here. These will liven the room up a bit." "Yeah," Max said, uncomfortably looking out of the corner of his eye at Vegeta, who was now leaning up against the wall and staring a hole straight through him. Max buried his hands in his pockets and looked over at Trunks, who was still sound asleep. His eyes roamed over the now nasty bruises and he winced a little. "Is he going to be okay?" he quietly asked. "Yeah, he'll be fine. He's a tough guy, just like his father," Bulma told him as she backed down next to Trunks. Max nodded and swallowed when he saw the burn on the side of Trunks' neck. His hands were shaking as he took a step back. He turned to the door, awkwardly muttering, "I need to step out and make a phone call, you know something." Max was startled as he looked up at the Saiyan who was staring at him. Max felt like he was completely exposed under his intense gaze. "Sir," he asked quietly. "You heard me, boy." Vegeta growled. "You are hiding something and you aren't leaving this room until you tell us what it is. And if you don't, then I will tell the police that you did this to my son." I didn't," Max sputtered, shaking his head. "I swear I had no idea, Vegeta." Bulma started, looking at her husband with narrowed eyes. He's just a kid who is hiding something, and I want to know what. Vegeta cut in, not taking his eyes off Max. It's stupid, Max whispered, looking back at Trunks. You'll think I'm nuts. Try me. The mark, Max said. His voice barely steady now. I've seen it before. Bulma and Vegeta were both giving him their full attention now. The prince stepped forward. Where? It's carved in one of the dorm room doors at school, Max answered, forcing himself to look away. Everyone always tries to figure out what it means, but no one knows. The mark showed up one morning. The girl who lived in the room died sometime the next night. When did this happen? Bulma quietly asked. Almost 20 years ago. The girl got sick and died one day to the next, Max said with a shrug, looking down at his shoes. How the hell do you know this? Vegeta demanded. Max scratched the back of his head, his eyes still down. Oh well, she's the only student who's ever died on the WCC campus. Students made up all kinds of stories, and now it's like an urban legend kind of thing. It's been dying down the last couple years though, cause we got a new school president. And she warned us to stop spreading those stories. Talking about how we're scaring the pre-frosh away and disrespecting the girl's memory. You'll get in serious trouble nowadays if you pass it down and you're caught, but some people do it anyways. Our frat doesn't though, we tell our guys the truth. He shrugged again and awkwardly kicked at the floor a little. What's the story? Bulma asked. Vegeta stayed silent, also unable to help his curiosity. Well, they say that she didn't die in her sleep. Some say her parents killed her in some kind of weird ritual. They say her parents were fucking insane. Others say that she went nuts and killed herself. But the real story that gets people going is that some kind of evil force overwhelmed her and killed her. Regardless of what you believe, rumors say that the girl still can be seen around campus. Some guys swear they've seen her and that she's always waiting. They say that on the anniversary of her death, you could hear her screaming on campus as she's dying. Course, a bunch of girls start screaming randomly on that day to scare the hell out of the freshmen. What was her name? Keegan, Trunks cut in. They all looked at him in surprise. His eyes were unfocused as he looked over at Max. Keegan how? Bulma asked, blinking in surprise. Her face scrunched up a little in confusion and she looked off in thought. Where have I heard that name before? She mumbled to herself. I saw her, Trunks insisted, closing his eyes again as Bulma reached to him and ran a hand through his hair. I felt her, I know I did. Max shook his head and bleakly responded, it's not possible. I saw her. Max looked at Trunks for a few moments. Finally, he turned and tried walking out, but Vegeta was blocking the way. He looked up and easily met Vegeta's gaze. At that moment, he was more afraid of being associated with Trunks than he was of the Saiyan prince. Sir, I've told you everything, and I'm really glad Trunks will be all right. But to be honest, this stuff is freaking me out and I just want to go home, he borderline pleaded. Vegeta studied him intently before finally concluding that he was being genuine. He stepped aside and let the boy pass, watching him the entire time while Bulma's phone suddenly started to vibrate. Hello? Bulma answered, turning away from both Vegeta and Trunks. What? She asked in a tone that immediately got Vegeta's attention. No, it's okay. One of us will go get her, thanks, Chi-Chi. What's wrong? Vegeta asked when she hung up and looked back at him with concern. Something's wrong with Bra.